This video will help you sleep and relax. But before we begin, I would like to know which city you're from and what time you're watching this. Now, subscribe to the channel, relax, and let's begin. I've been a trucker for 18 years, 18 goddamn years on the road, and nothing, I mean nothing, had ever shaken me like what happened on Route 491 last month. I'm still trying to make sense of it all. My therapist suggested I write it down, get it out of my system, so here goes. I'd heard all the stories about Dead Man's Curve, every trucker has. That stretch of 491 that winds through those dense woods has more crosses and memorials on the side of the road than any highway I've ever driven. The locals have a million theories. Vengeful spirits, some kind of curse from when they built the road through an old burial ground, or just bad engineering combined with tired drivers. I always wrote it off as superstition. People need stories to explain tragedy, right? My dispatcher called me around 3 in the afternoon on a Thursday. "Jake, I need you to take a load to Farmington. Delivery window closes at 6 a.m. tomorrow." I checked the map and did some quick math. That's cutting it close. I'd have to go through Dead Man's Curve at night. There was a pause on the line. "Look, I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important. This client pays our bills. Can you do it or not?" The extra pay for urgent delivery was too good to pass up. "Yeah, I'll do it." I set out around 7 that evening after loading up. The first few hours were normal. Just me, my thermos of coffee, and the drone of tires on asphalt. The radio kept me company for a while, but as I got deeper into the mountains, the signal faded to static. It was around 11:30 when I hit the start of what truckers call Dead Man's Curve. It's not just one curve, it's a 20-mile stretch of highway that twists through mountains and forest. In daylight, it's actually pretty beautiful. At night, it's a different story. The trees seemed to press in on both sides of the road, like they were trying to reclaim the asphalt. My headlights barely cut through the darkness ahead. The moon was just a sliver that night, and clouds kept covering what little light it offered. I remember checking my mirrors and seeing absolutely nothing behind me, just darkness. That should have been comforting, but somehow it wasn't. I felt utterly alone out there. About 5 miles into the stretch, my truck's cab suddenly got cold, like unnaturally cold. I cranked the heat, but it didn't seem to help. I figured maybe the heating system was acting up, but then I noticed my breath fogging in front of my face. In May, in New Mexico, that's not right. I was rubbing my hands together trying to stay warm when movement caught my eye at the side of the road. I slowed down instinctively and saw her, a woman in a white dress, standing at the edge of my headlight's reach, just standing there. No car nearby, no house in sight, nothing but woods for miles. I hit the brakes harder than I meant to. The truck shuddered to a stop about 50 feet past where I'd seen her. My first thought was that someone was in trouble, maybe dropped off by an angry boyfriend or something. I grabbed my flashlight, opened the door, and called out, "Hey, you need help?" My voice echoed back at me. Nothing else. I walked back to where I'd seen her, sweeping my flashlight across the shoulder of the road and into the tree line. There was no sign anyone had been there. No footprints in the soft dirt at the edge of the road. Nothing. I stood there for a minute, confused and honestly a little freaked out. But I told myself it was just my tired brain playing tricks. Maybe it was just a deer and my mind turned it into something else. That happens when you've been driving too long. Back in the truck, I cranked some music to keep myself alert and pulled back onto the road. My delivery deadline was ticking closer, and I couldn't afford to stop again for hallucinations. About 3 miles further, my headlights illuminated something that made my blood run cold. There was a body lying across the road. A man, face down, wearing a leather jacket and jeans. I slammed on the brakes, the load shifting behind me as the truck skidded to a halt just feet from the body. My heart was hammering in my chest. I grabbed my phone to call 911, but there was no signal. Of course there wasn't. I took a deep breath and climbed down from the cab, flashlight in hand. As I approached the body, I noticed how still it was. Too still. The guy wasn't moving at all, not even the slight rise and fall of breathing. I called out, but got no response. When I got closer, I could see his skin had a bluish tint where it was visible around his collar. He looked dead, really dead. I knelt down beside him, hesitating before reaching out to check for a pulse. His skin was ice cold, no pulse, nothing, and he was stiff, like he'd been dead for hours. I stood up, backing away, my mind racing. I needed to report this, but had no cell service. I'd have to drive to find help or signal. That's when I heard it. A low growling sound, almost like an animal, but not quite. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Then I saw lights approaching from behind me, red and blue flashing lights. Police, thank God. I waited by the body, relief washing over me. But as the police car pulled up and stopped, I noticed something odd. There was no siren, and the light bar looked wrong, old-fashioned, like from a 70s cop show. A tall officer stepped out. He moved stiffly as he approached, his face hidden in the shadow cast by his hat. "Officer, I just found this man. I think he's dead," I called out. The officer didn't respond. He just kept walking toward me, his footsteps making no sound on the asphalt. He stopped about 10 feet away. "Sir, did you hear me? There's a dead body here," I said, gesturing down. Still nothing, just silence. I couldn't even see his face clearly. Something about the way he stood there made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. "Look, I need to keep moving. I have a deadline. I'll give you my information, but I can't stay here all night," I said, starting to get annoyed despite the bizarre situation. That's when the officer finally moved. He slowly raised his arm and pointed at the road where the body had been. I looked down, and my stomach dropped. The body was gone, completely gone. No drag marks, no blood, nothing, just empty asphalt. I looked back at the officer, a chill running through my entire body. "Where did he—" I didn't finish the sentence because at that moment I saw headlights approaching from behind the police car. Bright headlights, too bright, and coming way too fast. The officer didn't move or react at all as the vehicle bore down on us. I had to dive to the side of the road to avoid being hit as it barreled past. A massive old semi-truck that looked like something from the 70s. It was rusty and dented, belching black smoke, but moving faster than any loaded truck should be able to. As it passed, I caught a glimpse of the driver through the window, a pale, expressionless face with eyes that looked like empty black holes. Not dark eyes, actual holes, like there was nothing behind them at all. When I looked back toward the police car, it was gone. No tire marks, no sign it had ever been there, just empty roads stretching back into darkness. I ran back to my truck, hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. I tried my phone again, no signal, but now the screen was flickering with static. I tried the CB radio, but it just produced a harsh, staticky noise that gradually formed into what sounded like words. "You can't escape. Dead Man's Curve is mine." I'm not ashamed to admit I nearly pissed myself right then and there. I fired up the engine and hit the gas, desperate to get out of that place. The needle climbed, 50, 60, 70 miles per hour. Way too fast for that road, but I was beyond caring about safety at that point. In my mirrors, I saw headlights, the same unnaturally bright headlights from the truck that had nearly hit me. It was gaining on me fast. I pushed my rig harder, taking the curves at speeds that had my trailer threatening to jackknife with every turn. The engine was screaming, but those headlights kept getting closer. The CB radio crackled to life again. "All drivers end up the same on Dead Man's Curve." The voice was raspy, like someone who'd been smoking for decades, but with a weird echo that didn't sound human. I shut the radio off, but it turned itself back on, louder this time. "Your truck will look nice with the others, Jake Harper." It knew my name. It knew my fucking name. The Phantom truck was right on my tail now, its grille nearly touching my back bumper. I could see the driver more clearly in my mirrors. That same expressionless face, those horrible empty eyes. It was smiling now, a grin that stretched too wide across that pale face. I was coming up on the sharpest turn in the whole stretch, the actual Dead Man's Curve that gave the area its name. I knew I was going too fast, but the phantom truck was forcing me forward, pushing me. My headlights illuminated the yellow warning signs, the reflective chevrons indicating the sharp turn ahead. I hit the brakes, but nothing happened. The pedal went straight to the floor with no resistance. No brakes, no fucking brakes. I yanked the wheel, trying to make the turn, but physics wasn't on my side. I felt the moment when the tires lost their grip. The guardrail appeared in my headlights, rushing toward me. There was a horrible screeching sound as metal hit metal, and then I was airborne. They say your life flashes before your eyes when you're about to die. That's bullshit. All I saw was darkness rushing up to meet me as my truck plunged down the embankment. I woke up in a hospital 3 days later. They told me a pair of hikers had spotted the wreckage of my truck the next morning and called it in. The cab was crushed, the trailer split open. By all rights, I should have been dead. The state troopers who interviewed me said, there were no signs of another vehicle involved, no brake marks on the road. They concluded I must have fallen asleep at the wheel and lost control. When I tried to tell them what really happened, they exchanged that look, the one that says, this poor guy has a head injury. It's been 4 weeks now. I still have nightmares every night. Sometimes I'm back in the truck, perpetually falling. Sometimes I'm standing on that dark road with the body that disappears. Sometimes I'm just running through endless woods while something with black hole eyes chases me. I don't drive trucks anymore. I don't drive at all. My left leg is still in a cast, and the doctors aren't sure if I'll ever walk normally again. The weirdest part, when they recovered my personal effects from the truck, they found my phone. The screen was cracked, but it still worked. There was one new photo on it that I didn't take. A grainy image of my truck at the bottom of the ravine, taken from above, with a pale figure standing next to the wreckage. I'm writing this all down because I need someone to believe me. Route 491's Dead Man's Curve has claimed dozens of trucks over the years. Drivers disappear or die in crashes that don't make sense. Local officials blame it on the dangerous road conditions, or tired drivers, or mechanical failures. But I know better now. Something owns that road, something that's been collecting trucks and drivers for decades, and I'm one of the only ones who got away. I don't know why I survived when so many others didn't. All I know is that sometimes, late at night, I still hear that raspy voice whispering, "You can't escape. I'll find you eventually." And I'm terrified that it's right. Story 2. I still can't sleep right most nights. It's been 3 months since it happened, but every time I close my eyes, I see her face. I've been driving trucks for almost 20 years, and I've seen some weird stuff on the road, but nothing like this. Nothing that makes me question my own sanity. I'm a long-haul trucker. Name's Mike Donovan. I mostly run routes through the Midwest and East Coast. Never been one for ghost stories or supernatural crap. I'm the guy who laughs at those true haunting shows, or at least I was. It was the second week of October, unseasonably cold for West Virginia. I was hauling a load of steel beams from Ohio to a construction site outside Pittsburgh. The dispatcher had me on a tight schedule, so I was driving through the night to make my delivery window. Route 50 cuts through some of the most isolated parts of West Virginia, just miles of dark forest and rolling hills with hardly any towns between. Around 3 in the morning, 3:07 according to my dashboard clock, I remember checking it, I was fighting to stay alert. I'd been driving since noon the previous day, stopping only for fuel and a quick dinner. The road was completely empty, just my headlights cutting through thick darkness and occasional fog patches hovering over the asphalt. I was just passing a mile marker when I saw her. At first, I thought it was just road fatigue playing tricks on my eyes. This figure standing on the shoulder, thumb out, a hitchhiker in the middle of absolute nowhere at 3 in the morning. But as my high beams swept across her, I realized it was a young woman in what looked like a white dress. I distinctly remember thinking, what the hell is she wearing that for in 40-degree weather? Something about her made me hit the brakes. I still don't know why. 20 years of driving, and I've never picked up a hitchhiker. It's rule number 1, you don't stop for strangers, especially on deserted roads in the middle of the night. But something compelled me to slow down. Maybe it was concern about a young woman alone in such an isolated spot. Maybe it was something else. I pulled over about 20 yards ahead of her and watched in my side mirror as she walked toward my truck. Her movement was off somehow. Not stumbling exactly, but not quite natural either, like someone trying to remember how to walk. I hit the button to unlock the passenger door and leaned over to push it open. "Where are you headed?" I called out, trying to sound casual while my instincts screamed at me to just drive away. She didn't answer, just climbed into the cab without a word. Up close, I could see she was maybe in her early 20s with long dark hair that hung in tangled clumps around her pale face. Her dress wasn't white exactly, more like a faded cream color, and it looked damp even though it hadn't been raining, and there was a smell that came in with her, like wet soil and something metallic. "You okay?" I asked, pulling back onto the empty highway. Kind of dangerous to be hitchhiking out here, especially this time of night. She turned her head toward me, and that's when I got my first real look at her eyes. They were dark, almost black in the dim light of the cab, and they seemed hollow somehow. Not drugged out hollow, but empty, like there was nothing behind them. "I need to get home," she finally said. Her voice was soft but raspy, like she hadn't used it in a while. "Can you take me home?" "Sure," I said, though my mouth had gone dry. "Where's home?" She didn't answer directly, just turned to stare out the windshield. "Past Clarksburg," she eventually said. "I'll show you where to turn." We drove in silence for several miles. I tried the radio to break the tension, but got nothing but static. Even stations that should have been clear were just white noise. I switched it off and cleared my throat. "So, what had you out so late?" I asked, trying to make conversation, trying to convince myself this was just a normal girl with a normal explanation. "I've been trying to get home for a long time," she said, still staring straight ahead. "People don't stop much anymore." Something about the way she said it made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, suddenly aware of how confined the space was. The cab of a semi might be bigger than a car, but it still felt suffocating in that moment. "You believe in ghosts, Mr. Donovan?" she asked suddenly. I nearly drove off the road. I hadn't told her my name. "How did you—" "Some spirits never stop wandering," she continued as if I hadn't spoken. "They're trapped, repeating the same patterns over and over, trying to get home." My heart was hammering now. I glanced over at her, trying to keep my eyes on the road while also watching her. She hadn't moved, still staring forward, hands folded in her lap. I noticed then that her dress had dark stains on it, stains that looked suspiciously like dried blood. "Who are you?" I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. She didn't answer, just slowly turned her head to look at me again. A small, sad smile pulled at her lips, but it didn't reach those empty eyes. That's when I looked at the passenger window, an automatic reflex, checking my blind spot before changing lanes to put some distance between us and the guardrail. And what I saw in the reflection made my blood turn to ice. In the glass, her reflection wasn't sitting beside me. She was standing, looming over me, her face contorted into something inhuman, mouth open unnaturally wide, those empty eyes now black pits in her face. But when I whipped my head back to look at her directly, she was still sitting calmly in the passenger seat, that small, sad smile still on her lips. I slammed on the brakes so hard the truck fishtailed. The tires screamed against the asphalt as we skidded to a stop in the middle of the highway. I was breathing hard, practically hyperventilating, as I turned to confront her. But the passenger seat was empty, completely empty. I sat there for a good minute, just staring at the vacant seat, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. The cab doors were still locked. There was nowhere. She could have gone. She had just vanished. With shaking hands, I reached over and touched the seat where she'd been sitting. It was ice cold. Not just cool, but a deep, penetrating cold that seemed to seep into my fingertips. And that smell, damp earth and something metallic, still hung in the air. I don't remember much about the next 30 minutes. I know I drove like hell, well over the speed limit, all the way to a truck stop outside Clarksburg. I barely put the rig in park before I was stumbling into the diner attached to the stop, probably looking like I'd seen, well, a ghost. The place was nearly empty, just a couple of other drivers nursing coffees and a middle-aged waitress behind the counter. She took one look at me and poured a cup of coffee without asking. "You look like you've had a rough night, honey," she said, sliding the mug toward me as I collapsed onto a stool. I must have looked completely shell-shocked because she leaned in, concern etched on her face. "You all right? You're white as a sheet." I took a gulp of coffee, burning my tongue but not caring. I picked up a hitchhiker back on Route 50, a young woman, and I couldn't even finish the sentence. The waitress, Linda, according to her name tag, straightened up, her expression changing from concern to something like resignation. "Dark hair, white dress?" she asked quietly. I nearly dropped my mug. "You know her?" Linda sighed and glanced at the other drivers, who were suddenly very interested in our conversation. One of them, an older guy with a salt and pepper beard, nodded slowly. "You're not the first," Linda said, keeping her voice low. "We get a driver in here every few months with the same story. Been happening for years." "What the hell are you talking about?" My hands were still shaking so badly I had to set the mug down. "Local legend," the older driver said, moving to the stool next to mine. "They say she was killed in a car wreck on Route 50 back in the 80s, coming home from a dance or something. Her boyfriend was driving drunk, ran off the road about 15 miles east of here. She was thrown from the car, died on the side of the highway. Story goes," Linda continued, "she's been trying to get home ever since. Hitches rides with truckers and vanishes before they can get her there. Some say she's looking for the boyfriend who killed her. Others think she's just lost, trying to find her way back to where she belongs." I stared at them, my mind racing. Part of me wanted to laugh it off, to find some rational explanation, but there was no explaining how she knew my name, how she disappeared from a locked cab, how her reflection didn't match reality. "Has anyone ever gotten her home?" I asked, immediately feeling stupid for the question. The older driver shook his head. "Not that I've heard, though there was a guy about 10 years back who claimed he drove her all the way to some old farmhouse outside of town. Said she thanked him and walked up to the door, but when he checked back the next day, the place had been abandoned for years." I stayed at that truck stop until dawn, drinking coffee and listening to other drivers' stories. Some were skeptical, some had their own encounters with strange things on the road. By the time I got back in my truck to finish my delivery, I'd almost convinced myself it was just exhaustion playing tricks on me. Almost. I completed my run to Pittsburgh and took a different route back. In fact, I haven't driven Route 50 through West Virginia since. I've turned down good-paying loads just to avoid it. My dispatcher thinks I'm crazy, but I don't care. Here's the thing that still haunts me, though. Sometimes, when I'm driving late at night on some empty stretch of highway, I find myself checking the shoulder of the road. Not out of caution, but because part of me is looking for her. And sometimes, just for a split second in the corner of my eye, I think I see a figure in a white dress, thumb out, waiting for someone to take her home. And every time I think about her, I hear her voice in my head, raspy and soft. Some spirits never stop wandering. I still don't know what happened that night. Was she a ghost, a hallucination, or something else entirely? All I know is that I can't explain it and I can't forget it. And sometimes, when I'm about to fall asleep, I swear I can smell damp earth and something metallic in the air. Story 3. I've been driving big rigs for 20 years now. Chicago to LA, Boston to Miami, Seattle to Dallas. You name a route, I've probably hauled something along it. You get used to the loneliness out there, the way the highway stretches endlessly in front of you, how the night wraps around your cab like a blanket. But what happened to me last September on Route 46 in New Mexico? I still can't make sense of it. I was on a standard haul, electronics from Chicago headed to the West Coast. Good money, tight schedule, nothing unusual. I'd made that run dozens of times before. My rig was running great. A Peterbilt I've had for 7 years now, practically my second home. I'd left Amarillo that morning and was pushing through New Mexico, trying to make up some time. Night had fallen by the time I approached Albuquerque. The moon was barely visible behind scattered clouds, and the desert stretched out on either side of the highway, just endless darkness broken up by the occasional scrub brush. I decided to take Route 46 to bypass some of the city traffic. It's a shortcut most GPS systems don't recommend, but us truckers know it saves about 40 minutes. What I didn't realize was that I was heading straight for what locals call the Dead Mile. I'd heard whispers about it in truck stops, how satellite signals drop out there, how cell phones die, how sometimes truckers report lost time. I always figured it was just another trucker ghost story, the kind we tell to keep ourselves awake during those long overnight hauls. Around 11:30 at night, I hit that stretch of road. It starts just past an old abandoned gas station with a fallen-in roof. The moment I passed that marker, the air in my cab felt different, heavier somehow, like the pressure had changed. My ears popped. The temperature seemed to drop about 10 degrees in seconds. I reached to turn up the heat when my CB radio suddenly crackled to life. Just static at first, white noise that made me jump in my seat. I hadn't been monitoring Channel 19. Most drivers don't use CBs much anymore with cell phones being so common. But there it was, loud static, then something that sounded like a voice trying to push through. "Hello? Anyone out there?" I said, grabbing the handset. The static continued, then cleared for just a moment. "Turn back." The voice was deep, distorted, barely audible through the interference. "Not welcome." I figured it was some local kids messing around. "Who's out there?" I asked, but the radio went dead. Complete silence. That's when I saw him. My headlights caught a figure standing perfectly still at the edge of the road. Tall, unnaturally tall, maybe 6.5 feet, wearing what looked like an old-fashioned long coat that reached almost to the ground. Wide-brimmed hat pulled low, shadowing the face. No reflective clothing, no vehicle nearby, nothing to explain why someone would be standing out there in the middle of nowhere at that hour. He didn't move as I approached, didn't turn his head, didn't step back from the road, didn't react at all to my 18-wheeler bearing down on him at 65 miles per hour. I instinctively slowed a bit, though I was still a good distance from him. As I passed by, I looked in my side mirror, expecting to see him still standing there. But the roadside was empty, completely empty. I checked my mirrors frantically, left, right, nothing. No one walking away, no one. Moving into the desert. Just gone. My hands tightened on the wheel. I'm not the type to scare easy. You don't last 20 years on the road if you do. But something about this felt wrong. Really wrong. The radio burst to life again, louder this time. "You should have turned back, Benjamin." My blood went cold. I never identified myself on the radio, never said my name. The GPS on my dashboard suddenly froze, the screen showing me still miles back. Then it went black completely. My phone showed no service, not unusual out here, but somehow more ominous now. I was completely cut off. My headlights flickered once, twice. I tapped the dash, an old habit when electronics act up. "Come on, don't do this to me," I muttered. The lights steadied, and when they did, he was there. The same tall figure, now standing directly in the middle of the road, maybe 50 yards ahead. I hit the brakes hard, the load shifting behind me. My tires screeched against the asphalt as I swerved, barely missing him. The truck skidded to a stop, leaving rubber on the road. I was breathing hard, hands shaking. For a moment, I just sat there, engine idling, trying to process what had happened. No way could anyone have moved that fast. No way could he have gotten in front of me without me seeing him approach. I looked around. Empty road stretching behind me. Empty road ahead. No sign of the figure. But something caught my eye. In the beam of my headlights, a trail of footprints in the dust on the shoulder, leading away from the road and into the darkness. I should have just driven on, should have floored it and not looked back until I hit California. But 20 years of driving trains you to check on people, especially out in remote areas like this. What if it was just some drunk who needed help? What if someone was trying to flag me down because they were stranded? So I grabbed my flashlight, checked that my knife was in my pocket, and stepped down from the cab. The night was silent. Not the normal desert silence with wind and distant animal sounds. This was complete silence, like someone had pressed mute on the world. The air felt thick, almost difficult to breathe. My flashlight beam seemed weaker than it should have been, barely cutting through the darkness. "Hello," I called out. "Anyone there? You need help?" Nothing. Just that unnatural silence. I walked toward where I'd seen the footprints, my boots crunching on the gravel shoulder. The tracks were clear. Large prints, deeper than they should be, even for a tall man. They led straight away from the road into the desert scrubland. I followed them for maybe 20 feet before stopping. This was stupid. I wasn't going to wander into the desert in the middle of the night chasing after someone who might be dangerous. I turned back toward my truck and froze. Someone was standing next to my rig. At first, I thought another vehicle had pulled up, but the road was empty in both directions. Just the tall figure, now standing perfectly still beside my passenger door. I couldn't make out his face. The hat shadow was too deep, the night too dark, but I could feel him watching me. My flashlight beam wouldn't reach that far, flickering and dimming when I tried to point it at him. "What do you want?" I shouted, trying to sound authoritative despite the fear crawling up my spine. He didn't respond, didn't move, just stood there watching. I had two choices: approach my truck and this, whatever it was, or run. And where would I run to? Miles of desert in every direction. My truck was my only way out. I started walking back, flashlight beam bouncing with each step, eyes fixed on the figure. As I got closer, I could see more details. The coat was old-fashioned, like something from a century ago, dark and dusty. His hands hung at his sides, fingers unnaturally long, 20 feet away, 15, 10, close enough now to see that he was even taller than I'd first thought, well over 6.5 feet. "I'm just passing through," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I don't want any trouble." 5 feet away now. I reached for my door handle, and that's when he moved. One fluid motion, and he was at my passenger window, those long fingers pressed against the glass. I couldn't see his face clearly, but I could see his mouth, stretched into a smile that was too wide, teeth that gleamed too white in the darkness. "You can't leave," he whispered, but somehow I heard it clearly, as if he was speaking directly into my ear. "No one leaves the dead mile. I've never moved so fast in my life." I wrenched my door open, threw myself into the cab and slammed it shut. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life. He was still there, at the passenger window, that terrible smile widening. His fingers pressed harder against the glass, and I swear I could see the window beginning to frost over from his touch, ice crystals spreading outward in delicate patterns. I threw the truck into gear and floored it. The tires spun, caught, and then I was moving, accelerating as fast as an 18-wheeler can. I didn't look at the passenger window, didn't want to know if he was still there, if somehow he was keeping pace with a truck doing 60, 70, 80 miles per hour. The radio crackled again. "See you soon, Benjamin Walker." Then silence. Complete silence. Not even the normal static you get from a CB radio. I drove straight through the night, didn't stop until I hit a truck stop outside Flagstaff, Arizona. My hands were still shaking when I pulled in. The sun was just coming up. I sat there for a long time, trying to make sense of what had happened, trying to convince myself it was just exhaustion, just my mind playing tricks after too many hours on the road. But I knew better. Something had happened on that stretch of Route 46. At the truck stop, I finally worked up the courage to check my passenger side. No frost on the window, no fingerprints, nothing to suggest anyone had been there at all. My GPS was working normally again, my phone had service. Everything was back to normal, except me. I wasn't normal anymore. I ran into an old-timer at that truck stop, guy named Harold, who'd been driving since the 70s. When I mentioned Route 46 and the Dead Mile, his face went pale. "You drove that at night?" he asked, his coffee cup frozen halfway to his lips. "And you're sitting here talking to me?" He told me stories then, stories about drivers who disappeared on that stretch of road, about trucks found abandoned, engines still running, about the drivers who did return being different somehow, changed in ways no one could quite put their finger on. "There's something wrong with that place," Harold said, his voice dropping to a whisper even though we were alone. "Something that don't belong in this world." I finished that haul to California, but I've never taken Route 46 again. I've turned down good-paying jobs that would require it. I'll drive hundreds of miles out of my way to avoid it. It's been 4 months now. Sometimes when I'm driving late at night, I'll catch movement in my mirror, just a glimpse of something tall wearing a wide-brimmed hat. When I look again, there's nothing there, just empty road behind me. My CB radio will suddenly cut to static sometimes, no matter what channel I'm on. I'll hear that whisper again. "See you soon, Benjamin." I don't know what I encountered on the Dead Mile that night. Don't know if it was real or if I'm losing my mind. All I know is I can feel it waiting for me, watching, patient. And I know with absolute certainty that one night I'll look in my mirror and instead of just a glimpse, he'll be there, standing in the middle of the road behind me, waiting to finish whatever began that night. Story 4. I've never told this story to anyone outside my immediate family. Even after all this time, my hands shake when I type this. I guess I need to get it off my chest, and maybe someone here has experienced something similar or can make sense of what happened. 5 years ago, my grandmother passed away after a long battle with cancer. She was everything to me, raised me when my parents were going through their messy divorce, taught me how to bake those apple pies everyone fights over at Thanksgiving, and was the one person who never judged me for dropping out of college. Her death hit me like a ton of bricks. The funeral was held at this ancient cemetery on the outskirts of town, Oakwood Memorial. It's one of those places with graves dating back to the 1800s, with huge oak trees that cast these long shadows across the tombstones. The kind of place that feels peaceful during the day, but would give anyone the creeps after dark. The service itself was beautiful. About 50 people showed up, friends, family, neighbors. My grandmother was well loved in the community. I was standing next to my mom, trying to hold it together while the minister spoke, when I noticed him. He was standing about 30 yards away, partially hidden behind a large maple tree. Tall guy, maybe in his 50s, wearing a dark coat despite it being pretty warm that day. He wasn't crying or showing any emotion really, just staring at the ceremony with this intense, almost angry expression. At first I thought maybe he was a distant relative I didn't recognize or one of Grandma's old friends, but something felt off. While everyone else was huddled together in shared grief, this man remained completely isolated. His posture was rigid, his eyes never leaving the casket, and that expression, it wasn't sadness. It was something closer to hatred. After the ceremony, people started heading to their cars for the reception at my aunt's house. I kept watching this stranger who hadn't moved an inch. Finally, I decided to approach him. I don't know what possessed me to do that. Maybe grief makes you do weird things. "Excuse me," I called out as I walked toward him. "Did you know my grandmother?" The moment I spoke, his head snapped in my direction. For a split second, our eyes met, and I swear my blood turned to ice. There was such intensity in his gaze, such naked hostility. Without saying a word, he turned and walked away with quick, purposeful strides. By the time I reached the tree where he'd been standing, he was already disappearing through the cemetery gates. I mentioned it to my mom on the drive to the reception, but she was so distraught that she barely registered what I was saying. "Probably just someone paying their respects, Eliza," she said, wiping her eyes with a tissue. Your grandmother knew a lot of people. I tried to put it out of my mind. Grief does strange things to people, I told myself. Maybe he was just uncomfortable at funerals. Maybe he had his own issues. I spent the next 2 days in a fog of grief and exhaustion, helping sort through Grandma's belongings and thanking people for their casseroles and sympathy cards. Then my uncle called. "Someone's vandalized Mom's grave," he said, his voice tight with anger. "I went to put fresh flowers this morning and found, well, you should come see for yourself." 20 minutes later, I was standing in front of my grandmother's grave, feeling sick to my stomach. The headstone had been scratched with something sharp, not enough to completely deface it, but enough to leave visible marks across the surface. The small angel statue we'd placed beside it was smashed to pieces. The fresh flowers my aunt had left the day before were trampled and scattered. But here's the strange part. Amid all this destruction, a small blue ceramic vase sat perfectly intact, filled with white lilies that none of us had placed there. The vase was positioned precisely in the center of the grave, as if carefully placed by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. "Who would do something like this?" my uncle kept saying, pacing back and forth. "What kind of sick person desecrates a grave?" I knew instantly. The man from the funeral. I described him to my uncle, who didn't recognize the description. We reported the vandalism to the cemetery management and the local police, but they didn't seem optimistic about catching anyone. "Unfortunately, cemetery vandalism isn't uncommon," the officer told us with a shrug. "Usually bored teenagers." But I knew better. This wasn't random. The careful placement of those lilies amid the destruction felt deliberate, almost like a message. And those eyes at the funeral, there was history there, something personal. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing that man's face, feeling his hateful stare. What connection did he have to my grandmother? Why would he desecrate her grave but leave flowers? None of it made sense. The next morning, I made a decision that in retrospect was incredibly stupid and dangerous. I was going to catch him in the act. I didn't tell anyone what I was planning. I knew my family would try to stop me, or worse, insist on coming along. Around 10 that evening, I parked my car about a quarter-mile from the cemetery entrance and walked the rest of the way with just a small backpack containing water, snacks, my phone, fully charged, a flashlight, and pepper spray. I wore dark clothes and a black hoodie, partly to blend in with the shadows and partly because the spring nights were still chilly. Getting into the cemetery was easier than I expected. The main gates were locked, but there was a section of fence near the back that was lower where I could climb over without too much trouble. The full moon provided enough light that I didn't need my flashlight as I made my way through the silent graves toward my grandmother's plot. I found a good hiding spot about 40 feet from her grave, behind a large family mausoleum where I could see her headstone clearly, but remain hidden, in shadows. Then I waited. Those hours were the longest of my life. The cemetery at night was a completely different place than during the day. Every shadow seemed to move. Every breeze through the trees sounded like whispers. Occasional distant traffic noise only emphasized the silence that followed. My back ached from sitting on the hard ground, but I was too afraid to move much. By 1 in the morning, I was beginning to think I'd made a terrible mistake. Maybe he wouldn't come back. Maybe it had been a one-time thing. Around 3 a.m., I heard it, the distinct sound of someone jumping the fence on the far side of the cemetery. My heart started hammering so hard, I worried he might hear it. I pressed myself closer to the cold stone of the mausoleum and held my breath. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, crunching on gravel and then silent when they hit grass. I couldn't see him yet from my position, but I could track his progress by sound. He was taking his time, not rushing. The footsteps got closer until finally he came into view. It was him, same man from the funeral, same dark coat. In one hand he carried what looked like fresh white lilies, and in the other, my stomach dropped, a hammer. He approached my grandmother's grave and stood directly in front of the headstone. For what felt like an eternity, he just stood there, staring down at it. His breathing was audible in the silence, heavy, almost like he was struggling to control himself. Then he placed the lilies carefully on the grave in exactly the same spot as before. What happened next still haunts my nightmares. For a full hour he stood motionless, just staring at the grave. I was afraid to move, afraid to breathe. My legs had gone numb from crouching so long, but I dared not shift position. Then, without warning, his entire demeanor changed. He let out a sound, half growl, half sob, and began attacking the headstone with the hammer. It wasn't random destruction. Each blow seemed calculated, aimed at specific parts of the stone. All while he was muttering something under his breath that I couldn't make out. I was frozen in terror, but I knew I had to do something. I had my phone, but there was no way police would arrive in time to catch him. Without thinking it through, I stood up and shouted, "Stop, what are you doing?" He whirled around so fast it was unnatural. When he saw me, his face contorted with such pure hatred that I physically stepped back. For a split second, we just stared at each other. Then he started walking toward me, hammer raised. "You're her granddaughter," he said, his voice surprisingly soft but filled with venom. "You look just like her when she was young." I turned and ran. I've never run so fast in my life. I could hear him behind me, his footsteps speeding up. The cemetery was a maze of gravestones and monuments, some dating back centuries. I zigzagged between them, trying to lose him, but he seemed to know the layout better than I did. At one point, I ducked behind a large stone angel and heard him pass by just feet away, his breathing heavy and ragged. For hours, though it was probably only 20 or 30 minutes, this terrible game of hide and seek continued. I'd find a hiding spot, stay until I heard him getting close, then run to another. My lungs were burning, my legs shaking from exhaustion and fear. Finally, I managed to wedge myself into a narrow space between two large family vaults where he couldn't see me. I heard him prowling nearby, calling out occasionally in that same soft, hate-filled voice. "I know you're here. Come out. I just want to talk about what she did." I stayed hidden until the sky began to lighten with dawn. Eventually, the sounds of his footsteps faded. When I was certain he was gone, I crawled out of my hiding place, legs cramping painfully, and made a dash for the main gate. By now it was almost 6 a.m., and an elderly groundskeeper was just unlocking it. He looked shocked at my disheveled appearance as I ran past him to my car. I called the police from the safety of a nearby gas station. They took my statement and increased patrols around the cemetery, but they never found him. The hammer was recovered near my grandmother's grave, which now bore fresh damage, but there were no fingerprints, no clues to his identity. The police suggested it might be someone with mental health issues who had fixated on my grandmother for some unknown reason. For months afterward, I was terrified he would find me. I changed my locks, stayed with friends, even considered moving to another town, but nothing happened. Life gradually returned to a semblance of normality, though I never visited the cemetery alone again. 5 years passed without incident. I almost convinced myself it was over, whatever it was. Then, 2 weeks ago, I went with my mother to place flowers on Grandma's birthday. As we approached the grave, I felt that same cold dread wash over me. The headstone had been repaired years ago, and there was no new damage, but something was wrong. The flowers we had placed the week before, yellow roses, Grandma's favorite, were gone. In their place were white lilies in a small blue ceramic vase, identical to the ones he had brought 5 years ago. My mother didn't understand why I suddenly couldn't breathe, why I grabbed her arm and dragged her back to the car. I finally told her everything as we drove away. She was silent for a long time before saying something that chilled me even more. "Your grandmother had secrets, Eliza, things she never talked about, a life before she met your grandfather. I don't know what my grandmother did. I don't know who this man is or why his hatred has survived for so long. But I know he's back. I know he's watching. And I'm terrified that this time he won't stop at the grave." Story 5. I've been driving trucks for nearly 17 years now, but what happened last? Winter on Route 83 through the plains still makes my skin crawl when I think about it. I've never been one to believe in ghost stories or any of that supernatural crap. Hell, I've driven through every state in the continental US at all hours of the night, in every kind of weather you can imagine. And the only things that ever scared me were idiot drivers and black ice. That changed on January 12th. I'd picked up a load in Bismarck headed for Kearney, Nebraska. Nothing special, just pallets of packaged food for grocery distribution. The weather forecast had mentioned snow, but nothing major, so I figured I'd push through rather than wait it out. The highways in the Dakotas and Nebraska can get lonely as hell in the winter, but that's part of why I took up long-haul driving. I like the solitude, or at least I used to. The snow started falling around 7 in the evening, just as the last bit of daylight was fading. It wasn't too bad at first, just enough to make the road sparkle in my headlights. I had my thermos of coffee, my satellite radio playing some classic rock station, and about 400 miles of empty highway ahead of me. By 9, the snow had picked up. Not a blizzard or anything, but steady enough that I had to slow down to about 50. The visibility wasn't great, but I could still see well enough ahead to drive safely. That's when I first noticed the headlights behind me. There's nothing unusual about another vehicle on the highway, even at night in the middle of nowhere. But something about these lights bothered me right away. They were keeping a perfect distance, not getting any closer, not falling behind. Just there, like whoever was driving was pacing me exactly. I checked my side mirrors every few minutes, watching those headlights. They looked old-fashioned somehow, more yellow than the bright white LEDs that most trucks have nowadays, and they sat higher off the ground than a car, but not quite as high as my rig. Another truck, I figured. Maybe an older model. After about 20 minutes of this, I decided to test something. I gradually slowed down, dropping from 50 to 45, then to 40. The headlights behind me slowed too, maintaining that exact same distance. I sped back up to 50, and so did they. My neck prickled. It was weird, but I told myself it was probably just another driver using me as a pacer in the snow. Makes sense, right? Follow the guy ahead who knows the road, except I'd never driven this particular stretch of 83 before. Around 10:30 I came to a gentle curve in the highway, and that's when things got really strange. As I took the curve, I glanced in my mirror to check on those headlights, and they were gone. Just vanished. The road behind me was completely dark. I felt a rush of relief at first. Whoever it was must have turned off onto some side road I hadn't noticed. But as I straightened out from the curve, my high beams caught something ahead that made me slam on the brakes. There, stopped dead in the middle of the highway, was an old semi-truck. Not pulled over to the shoulder, right in the center of my lane. If I hadn't slowed down earlier because of those weird headlights, I might have plowed right into it. My rig slid a bit on the snowy asphalt before coming to a stop about 50 feet from the mystery truck. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. I hit my hazards and just sat there for a minute, trying to calm down and figure out what the hell was going on. The truck ahead was ancient, probably from the 60s or 70s. Even in the darkness and falling snow, I could see the rust eating away at its edges. The windows were frosted over completely, like it had been sitting there for hours, not minutes. And there were no lights on, no hazards, no marker lights, nothing. Just this dead, dark shape blocking the highway. I grabbed my flashlight from the glove compartment and my phone from the cup holder. No signal, of course, because why? Would there be in the middle of nowhere during a snowstorm? I hesitated before opening my door. Something felt wrong, like deeply wrong. But I couldn't just sit there, and I couldn't drive around without checking if the driver needed help. For all I knew, someone was hurt or having a heart attack in that cab. The cold hit me like a physical blow when I stepped down from my truck. The snow was coming down harder now, the wind whipping it into my face. I pulled my jacket tighter and started walking toward the abandoned truck, my flashlight beam bouncing off the swirling snowflakes. As I got closer, I could make out faded lettering on the door. Harland Haulers. Never heard of that company before. The truck was in awful shape. The kind that should have been in a junkyard 20 years ago, not on an interstate highway. I was about 15 feet away when my flashlight beam caught the license plate. It was so rusted and caked with ice that I could only make out a couple of numbers, but the expiration tag read 78, not 2018, just 78, as in 1978, 40 plus years expired. That's when I heard it, the sound of an engine revving coming from behind me. I spun around, and there they were again, those same headlights I'd seen following me, now about a quarter-mile back and coming fast. Too fast for the road conditions. I don't know what made me dive out of the way instead of trying to get the driver's attention. Pure instinct, I guess. I scrambled to the shoulder of the road, slipping in the snow and nearly falling on my ass. The oncoming vehicle, I could see now it was another old truck, similar to the one blocking the road, was bearing down on us at highway speed. It wasn't slowing down at all. I braced myself for the impact, the sound of crunching metal and breaking glass, but it never came. Instead, the truck. I don't know how to explain this without sounding insane. The truck seemed to merge with the stationary one. The headlights passed through it like it wasn't even there, and then both trucks were just gone, vanished. The road ahead and behind was completely empty except for my rig and the still falling snow. I stood there in the freezing cold for I don't know how long, my flashlight dangling uselessly from my hand. My brain couldn't process what I'd just seen. I kept blinking, thinking my eyes were playing tricks on me, that the trucks would reappear. But they didn't. Finally, the cold snapped me out of it. I stumbled back to my truck, cranked the heat as high as it would go, and just sat there shaking, and not just from the cold. I didn't know what to do. Call the police? And tell them what? That I'd seen a ghost truck get hit by another ghost truck and then both disappeared. They'd breathalyze me on the spot. So I did the only thing that made sense. I kept driving. My hands were clammy on the steering wheel despite the heat blasting from the vents. Every few seconds I checked my mirrors, half expecting to see those headlights reappear. The rest of the drive was uneventful, but I didn't relax for a single minute of it. Around 1 in the morning, I pulled into a truck stop just outside of North Platte. I needed coffee, food, and most of all, to be around other people for a while. The place was mostly empty, just a couple of local truckers having a late meal and the night shift staff. I sat at the counter and ordered coffee and a sandwich. My hands were still shaking a little as I picked up my mug. That's when I overheard the conversation from the booth behind me. Swear to God I saw it last winter on that same stretch, the Harland Hauler's rig. I froze with my coffee halfway to my lips. "Ah, you're full of shit, Pete," another voice said. "That's just an old trucker tale." "No way, man. My buddy Mike saw it too, couple years back. Old 71 Peterbilt, rusted to hell, just sitting there in the middle of the road. And those headlights that follow you, that's the phantom driver still trying to make his delivery." I turned around, slowly. 2 older guys, both with the weathered look of career truckers, were hunched over their coffees. "What's this about a Harland Hauler's truck?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. They both looked up, surprised. The older one, Pete, I guess, sized me up before answering. "Just an old ghost story," he said. "Back in '78, there was this trucking company called Harland Haulers. Small operation, maybe 20 rigs. They had this driver, don't remember his name, who got caught in the blizzard of the century out on Route 83. Radioed in that he was stuck, but by the time help arrived, they found his truck empty. Never found the driver, though they searched for weeks. Some say he tried to walk for help and froze to death." Pete took a sip of his coffee before continuing. "Anyway, since then, truckers have reported seeing his rig on that same stretch of road. Always during snowstorms, always at night. Some say they've seen it broken down in the road. Others say they just see his headlights following them for miles before disappearing." "What happens if you stop?" I asked, my mouth dry. The other trucker spoke up. "Nothing good. Story goes that he's looking for someone to take his place so he can finally rest. Anyone who stops and gets too close, well, they disappear too." Pete nodded. "My uncle knew a guy who claimed he stopped to help what he thought was a stranded driver back in the '80s. Said he walked up to the truck and saw someone inside, but when he tried to open the door, the whole truck just vanished. Guy was never the same after that." Started drinking, lost his CDL, the works. It's bullshit, the second trucker said, but his voice lacked conviction. Pete shrugged. Maybe, but every trucker who's been working these routes long enough knows the rule. If you see that truck, don't stop. Just keep driving. Whatever you do, don't look back. I didn't tell them what I'd seen. What would be the point? They'd either think I was crazy or making it up to join their ghost story session. Instead, I finished my coffee, paid my bill, and went back to my truck. I didn't sleep at all that night, even though I was exhausted. I just sat in my cab, watching the snow fall in the truck stop parking lot, wondering if I was losing my mind. I've been back on that stretch of Route 83 a few times since then. I always drive it in daylight now when I can, but sometimes schedules don't allow for that luxury. On those nights, especially when it's snowing, I watch my mirrors more carefully than ever, because I know those headlights are out there, and someday they'll find me again. I've thought about finding a different route, maybe even a different line of work, but something keeps pulling me back to that highway, like there's unfinished business there, like that phantom driver is waiting for me specifically. So I keep driving, and I keep watching my mirrors, and I remember the old trucker's warning, don't stop, don't look back. But I already did both of those things, and I can't shake the feeling that sooner or later the Harlan Phantom is going to finish what it started that night. Until Story 6. I still can't shake what happened to me last December. I've been driving trucks for almost 20 years, done every route you can imagine across the lower 48. Winter hauls are just part of the job when you're a long-haul trucker. At least, that's what I used to think. This happened during that brutal snowstorm that hit the Wyoming-South Dakota border region mid-December last year. I was hauling a load of electronics from Salt Lake City to Minneapolis. Decent paying gig, tight deadline, nothing unusual. I'd made that run dozens of times before in all kinds of weather. The forecast called for heavy snow, but nothing I hadn't handled before. The storm hit harder than expected around sundown, right as I was crossing into Wyoming. The temperature dropped to something like 15 below, with wind chill making it feel twice as cold. The kind of cold that doesn't just chill you, it burns. Visibility went to shit fast. My headlights barely cut 20 feet through the blowing snow, and the road was disappearing under fresh powder faster than the plows could clear it. I kept my speed around 40, which was probably still too fast, but I had a delivery window to hit. The CB radio was mostly quiet except for occasional warnings about ice patches and a jackknife trailer about 50 miles ahead. Nothing but me, my thermos of coffee, and Merle Haggard keeping me company. Around 8 that evening, I spotted what looked like a semi pulled over on the shoulder. Nothing too unusual, probably a driver waiting out the worst of the storm. Smart move, honestly, but something about it made me slow down as I passed. The truck was an older model Peterbilt, had to be at least 15 years old, with a faded blue cab. No company markings I could see, no hazards blinking, just parked there with the headlights on, cutting dim cones through the heavy snow. As I rolled past, I glanced over to check if the driver needed help. That's when I got my first real chill of the night. The guy behind the wheel was just staring straight ahead, not moving. His face was pale, and I don't mean like he was white, I mean bloodless pale. His eyes were open too wide, fixed on something straight ahead. I couldn't see his breath fogging inside the cab, which struck me as odd, given how frigid it was. I almost pulled over, trucker's code and all that, but something in my gut told me to keep moving. I radioed it in instead, mentioned there was a truck on the shoulder around mile marker 215 that might need assistance. No one responded, which wasn't that strange given the weather and spotty radio coverage in that area. I kept driving for about 3 more hours, battling the snow the whole way. By 11, I was starting to nod off, despite the coffee. The next rest stop was still about 40 miles ahead, but I spotted a smaller one coming up. Just a parking area with some bathroom facilities, no restaurant or anything, good enough for a quick nap. The place was completely deserted when I pulled in. No other trucks, no cars, just empty parking spaces under orange security lights that gave the falling snow an eerie glow. I backed into a spot facing the exit, cut the engine, and set my alarm for a 90-minute nap. Enough to refresh, but not enough to mess up my schedule. I couldn't have been asleep for more than 20 minutes when something woke me. At first, I thought it was my alarm, but the clock showed 11:37. Then, I heard it again, a light tapping sound on my passenger window. My first thought was highway patrol checking on vehicles. In weather this bad, they sometimes do welfare checks. I sat up, rubbed my eyes, and turned toward the passenger side. The blood in my veins turned to ice water. Standing outside my truck, snow piling on his shoulders, was the same man I'd seen in the parked truck hours ago and miles back. Same pale face, same two wide eyes. He was wearing a thin jacket completely inadequate for the weather, no gloves, no hat. There was no vehicle nearby, just him, standing there in a blizzard, staring at me through the glass. I froze, unable to move or think clearly. He shouldn't have been there. Couldn't have been there. My doors were locked, thank God, but the realization that I was alone in a deserted rest area with this stranger made my skin crawl. He tapped again, 3 precise knocks. Then he leaned closer to the window, close enough that I could see no fog formed when he breathed. His lips moved, forming words I could barely make out. "Let me in." I shook my head automatically. No way in hell was I opening that door. His expression didn't change. Not anger, not disappointment, nothing. Just that same empty stare. He tapped again, harder this time. "Let me in." "It's cold." His voice somehow carried through the glass, though it shouldn't have been possible over the howling wind. It sounded wrong, flat and hollow, like someone mimicking how a voice should sound without quite getting it right. I started the engine, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The man didn't back away from the truck. He just kept staring, tapping, his knuckles making that horrible clicking sound against my window. As my headlights came on, something happened that still haunts my nightmares. For just a second, just one brief moment, the light illuminated him fully, and I swear to God he looked transparent, like I could almost see the parking lot light through him. Then he blinked, and he was solid again. I threw the truck in gear and pulled out of that rest stop so fast I nearly slid on the ice. In my side mirror, I could see him standing in the same spot, watching me drive away, not moving an inch despite the violent storm around him. I drove for another hour in a state of complete panic, adrenaline keeping me wide awake. I finally pulled into a larger truck stop around 1 in the morning. This one had about a dozen other trucks parked there and a 24-hour diner attached. Safety in numbers. After securing my rig, I went inside, still shaking. I ordered coffee even though caffeine was the last thing I needed. I just wanted to be around other people, to convince myself I'd imagined the whole thing or at least dreamed it during my nap. There were 4 other truckers at the counter, all looking as tired as I felt. The waitress, an older woman named Darlene according to her name tag, must have noticed something was off with me. "You look like you've seen a ghost, honey," she said as she refilled my cup. "Storm getting to you?" I forced a laugh. "Something like that." One of the other drivers, a heavy-set guy with a gray beard, glanced over. "Road's nasty out there tonight. You come in from the west?" I nodded. "Yeah, just past. Through the Wyoming border a few hours ago." The man exchanged looks with another trucker. "Saw anything strange?" The question hit me like a punch to the gut. "What do you mean, strange?" The bearded trucker shrugged. "Just asking. That stretch has a reputation, especially in bad weather." The other driver, younger guy with a baseball cap, leaned forward. "He's talking about the frozen man, old trucker tale." "What frozen man?" I asked, though part of me didn't want to know. The older driver stirred his coffee. "Story goes that about 12 years ago, a trucker broke down during a blizzard worse than this one. No cell service back then, at least not good coverage. He left his truck to find help, got disoriented in the snow. They found him 3 days later, frozen solid about a quarter mile from the nearest rest stop. The younger driver jumped in. The weird part is, some truckers swear they've seen his old blue Peterbilt parked on the shoulder during bad storms. And sometimes, if you're unlucky enough to be alone at a rest stop, he'll come knocking on your door, asking to be let in. I felt the coffee turn sour in my stomach. That's just a story, right? The bearded driver nodded. Course it is. Though I will say I don't stop at those small rest areas during snowstorms anymore. Big places like this only. The conversation shifted to other topics, but I barely participated. My mind was racing, trying to rationalize what I'd seen. Coincidence. Exhaustion. Maybe I really had fallen asleep and dreamed the whole thing. I ended up staying at that truck stop until dawn, unable to face getting back in my cab alone. When I finally did, I checked every inch of the truck before starting it up. No footprints in the snow around my vehicle. No sign anyone had been there. The rest of the journey to Minneapolis was uneventful. Daylight and cleared roads made the previous night's experience seem distant, almost absurd. By the time I delivered my load, I'd nearly convinced myself it had been some weird hallucination brought on by fatigue and caffeine. Nearly. It's been almost a year now, and I've made that same Salt Lake to Minneapolis run probably 24 times since. I've never seen that blue Peterbilt again in the daylight. Never seen the pale man standing in a rest area. But twice now, during snowstorms, I've caught a glimpse of headlights in my mirror that seem to follow me for miles before disappearing. And once, when I was parked overnight at a truck stop in eastern Wyoming during a mild snowfall in February, I woke to the sound of tapping on my passenger window. I didn't look. I started the engine and drove away, heart hammering in my chest. I don't know what I saw that December night. I don't know if the frozen man is real or if I experienced some kind of stress-induced hallucination. What I do know is that I've changed my routes when possible to avoid that stretch of highway. When I can't avoid it, I don't stop at small rest areas anymore. I don't drive alone in snowstorms if I can help it. And no matter how tired I get, no matter who might be knocking, I never ever open my door at night when I'm parked along that lonely stretch of road. The worst part? Sometimes when I'm driving and it starts to snow, I swear I can hear a faint tapping sound coming from my passenger window, even when there's nobody there. Story 7. I've debated for months whether to share this. Even now, my hands are shaking as I type. What happened to me 7 years ago on Black Mountain in Kentucky haunts me daily. I was an experienced hiker back then, had tackled parts of the Appalachian Trail, done weekend treks through the Smokies, even some solo expeditions in Colorado. Nothing ever prepared me for what I encountered in those Kentucky woods. I'd heard the stories about Black Mountain, local legends, ghost tales, the usual backwoods folklore every rural area seems to cultivate. I dismissed them as campfire stories meant to spook tourists. I approached it like any other hiking challenge, just another peak to conquer, another trail to mark off my list. That morning started normally enough. I parked at the trailhead around 8 in the morning on a Tuesday in early October. The weather was perfect, crisp autumn air, clear skies, leaves just starting to turn. I remember checking my backpack one last time. 3 liters of water, high-protein snacks, first aid kit, map, compass, fully charged phone, portable battery, pocket knife, and a light jacket for when the temperature dropped later. Standard gear for a day hike. The first 2 hours on the trail were uneventful. I passed a couple of other hikers early on, but by mid-morning I had the path to myself. The solitude felt good. The trail was moderate difficulty. Some steep inclines that got my heart rate up, but nothing I couldn't handle. I stopped occasionally to photograph particularly striking views or interesting rock formations. Around hour 3, something changed. I reached a fork in the trail that wasn't marked on my map or showing up on my GPS app. I double-checked both, thinking I'd somehow gotten off course, but according to my coordinates, I was exactly where I should be. The main trail continued right, well-maintained and clearly marked. The left fork was narrower, less traveled, but definitely a human-made path. I hesitated. The smart choice would have been to stick to the mapped trail, but something about that unmarked path intrigued me. Looking back now, I wish I'd listened to that little voice of caution. Instead, I took the left fork, figuring I could always backtrack if it led nowhere. About half a mile in, I noticed the first strange carving on a tree trunk. Symbols I didn't recognize, not typical trail markers or graffiti. Just odd geometric patterns cut deep into the bark. I snapped a photo, thinking it might be some local trail tradition or maybe native American symbols. As I continued, more trees bore similar markings, becoming more frequent and elaborate. The trail grew increasingly overgrown. Branches reached across the path, creating a tunnel-like effect that blocked more and more sunlight. The forest seemed to close in around me. The birds had gone quiet too, something I only realized after the fact. That silence should have been my first real warning. After another mile, I picked up on a sound, a low, rhythmic humming that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It was barely audible at first, like the distant drone of highway traffic, but it grew steadier as I moved forward. I told myself it must be wind through the trees or maybe water running somewhere nearby, but it didn't sound quite natural. I should have turned back then. Every instinct was screaming at me to retreat, but stubborn curiosity pushed me forward. The trail began to slope downward into a small valley, and the humming grew louder, now clearly human in origin, multiple voices creating a continuous, harmonized tone. When I reached the edge of a small clearing, I crouched behind a fallen tree and peered through the underbrush. What I saw froze my blood. About 20 people stood in a circle in the clearing. They wore dark hooded robes that reached the ground, obscuring their bodies completely. In the center of their circle stood a crude stone altar, not some ancient relic, but something that looked relatively recently constructed from stacked rocks. On top lay what appeared to be animal remains and strange objects I couldn't identify from my distance. They were chanting now, the humming having evolved into words in a language I didn't recognize. It wasn't Latin or anything I could place, just harsh, guttural sounds repeated in a pattern. One figure, taller than the rest, moved to the center and raised something that caught the filtered sunlight, a blade of some kind. I must have shifted my weight or made some small noise, because suddenly the chanting stopped. The tall figure turned, and though I couldn't see a face within the hood, I felt their gaze lock directly on my hiding spot. My body reacted before my mind could process what was happening. I scrambled backward, abandoning stealth for speed, and ran. Behind me, shouts erupted from the clearing. I heard them coming after me, crashing through the underbrush. Pure adrenaline fueled my escape. I didn't follow the path. I just ran in what I thought was the direction back toward the main trail. Branches whipped my face and arms. I tripped over roots and rocks, falling hard several times but forcing myself back up immediately. My pack caught on branches, slowing me down, but I didn't dare stop to adjust it. The worst part was hearing them spread out behind me. They knew these woods. Where I crashed loudly through the forest, they moved with practiced efficiency. Occasionally, I'd hear a voice much closer than expected, forcing me to change direction. The sun was starting to lower in the sky, and I realized with horror that I'd lost all sense of direction. My phone had no signal, and in my panic, I'd left the trail so far behind that my GPS was useless. I was completely disoriented, running blindly through increasingly unfamiliar terrain. At one point, I heard a whistling sound pass my ear, followed by a thunk into a tree trunk just ahead of me. An arrow, an actual fucking arrow, was embedded in the wood. These people had bows. The realization that they were actively trying to harm me, not just scare me off, sent a new surge of terror through my body. As dusk approached, the forest grew darker. I was gasping for breath, my legs burning from exertion. I'd been running and hiding for hours. My water was gone. My face and arms were scratched and bleeding from countless branches and thorns. But stopping meant capture, and after seeing that arrow, I knew capture meant something worse than just being escorted off their property. In the fading light, I nearly ran headlong into a sheer rock face. Looking frantically for a path around it, I spotted what appeared to be an opening, the entrance to an old mining tunnel. Kentucky's mountains are riddled with them, abandoned decades ago when the coal played out. Without hesitation, I ducked inside. The tunnel was pitch black beyond the entrance. I fumbled with my phone's flashlight, casting weak light on rotting support beams and rusted rail tracks. Water dripped somewhere in the darkness. The air was damp and cold, heavy with the smell of wet earth and decay. I moved deeper inside, hoping the cultists wouldn't follow. About 50 yards in, I found a small side tunnel and squeezed into it, turning off my light and pressing myself against the cold rock wall. I tried to control my breathing, each exhale visible in the chill air. The temperature in the tunnel couldn't have been much above 40 degrees, but I didn't dare move. Time lost all meaning in that darkness. Minutes or hours might have passed as I huddled there, straining to hear any sounds of pursuit. My body trembled from cold, fear, and exhaustion. My thoughts raced with images of what might happen if they found me. Would anyone even know what had happened to me? Would they ever find my body? I must have been in that tunnel for at least 2 hours when I heard voices echoing through the main passage. My heart nearly stopped. They'd followed me in. I pressed myself further into my hiding spot, trying to become one with the stone. But as the voices grew closer, something seemed off. These voices sounded young, casual, not the harsh tones of my pursuers. A beam of light, much stronger than my phone's, swept along the main tunnel. This place is creepy as hell, dude. The viewers are gonna love this. Make sure you get that collapsed section over there. That looks awesome. YouTubers. Urban explorers filming in the mine. Under different circumstances, I might have laughed at the absurdity. When they passed near my hiding spot, I made a decision born of desperation. These were my only chance at help. I stepped out, hands raised, my face probably a mess of dirt and blood. "Please help me," I croaked, my voice hoarse from hours of running and fear. They both screamed. One dropped his camera while the other swung his flashlight like a weapon, temporarily blinding me. "What the fuck, man?" one shouted. "Are you trying to give us a heart attack?" It took several minutes to convince them I wasn't some murderous, mind-dwelling psychopath. They were 2 college students from the University of Kentucky, Kyle and Trevor, filming abandoned places for their small YouTube channel. Once they realized I was genuinely terrified and injured, they agreed to help me get out. I gave them a rushed, simplified version of what had happened, aware of how insane it sounded. They exchanged skeptical glances but seemed concerned enough about my physical state to put aside their doubts. "Look, we have another entrance we came in through," Trevor said. "It's closer to the road. We can get you to our car." Kyle added, "But if there really are people hunting you, we need to be quiet and move fast." They led me through a maze of tunnels I never would have navigated alone. We emerged about half a mile from where their car was parked on a service road. The night was fully dark now, with no moon, and only stars providing faint light. Every shadow looked like a robed figure. Every rustle in the trees sounded like pursuers closing in. We made it to their beat-up Honda Civic without incident, though every step felt like we were being watched. As we drove away from that mountain, I kept checking the rearview mirror, certain we'd see headlights following us. The boys took me straight to the nearest hospital in Harlan. I had a sprained ankle I hadn't even noticed in my adrenaline-fueled flight, multiple lacerations requiring stitches, severe dehydration, and the beginning stages of hypothermia from my time in the mine. The hospital staff asked what happened. I told them I got lost hiking and fell down a ravine. They seemed skeptical but didn't press the issue. I gave Kyle and Trevor all the cash I had, about $80, as thanks. They gave me their YouTube channel name and made me promise to watch their mine exploration video when it came out. I never did. I never wanted to see that place again, even on a screen. The police came the next day. I told them a watered-down version of events, mentioning finding people conducting some kind of ceremony but leaving out the altar and the arrow. They took notes, said they'd investigate, but their expressions told me they didn't believe much of my story. One officer suggested I might have stumbled upon some college kids playing Dungeons and Dragons in the woods. His partner laughed. I never heard back from them. When I called a week later, they said they'd found no evidence of any cult activity in the area I described. Of course they didn't. Those people had probably been using that remote location for years, specifically because it was difficult to find unless you knew where to look. I sold most of my hiking gear after that. I've never gone on another solo hike. I still have nightmares about hooded figures chasing me through endless forests. Sometimes I wake up hearing that rhythmic humming. I don't know who those people were or what they were doing in those woods. Some backwoods religious sect? An occult group? Something worse? I don't want to know. But I do know they were willing to kill to keep their activities secret, and they're still out there. The strangest thing? When I checked my phone after being discharged from the hospital, the photos I'd taken of the carved trees and the path were gone. All of them. I hadn't deleted them. Someone or something had. 7 years later, I still find myself checking over my shoulder, especially at night. I've moved twice since then. I've changed my name on social media. I don't tell people where I'm from anymore. Because sometimes when I'm alone and it's quiet, I swear I can hear that humming again. And I know they haven't forgotten me. Story 8. I still can't sleep properly when I travel alone. It's been 3 years, but every time I'm in an airport or staying somewhere unfamiliar, I find myself scanning faces, checking corners, and sleeping with one eye open. I know it probably sounds paranoid, but after what happened that New Year's Eve, I don't think I'll ever feel completely safe again. I was 21 at the time, a junior in college. My girlfriend Angela and I had been dating for about 8 months, and we'd planned to spend New Year's Eve together at her apartment with some friends. Nothing fancy, just drinks, music, and being together at midnight. But 2 days before, my mom called. My grandmother wasn't doing well, and the whole family was gathering at my parents' house. It might be her last New Year's, Mom said, her voice cracking slightly. How could I say no to that? Angela understood. She's amazing like that, but I was still bummed. I booked a last-minute flight from Boston to Cleveland for December 31st, planning to fly back on January 2nd. The ticket cost way more than I could afford as a broke college student, but family is family. The morning of New Year's Eve started with a light snow in Boston. Nothing major, just enough to make everything look pretty. My flight wasn't until 2 in the afternoon, so Angela and I had breakfast together before she drove me to Logan Airport. We kissed goodbye in the drop-off zone, and I promised to call her at midnight. That's when things started to go wrong. As soon as I got inside, I saw the departure board flashing with delays. My flight was pushed back an hour, then another. I grabbed a coffee and found a seat near my gate, trying to make the best of it. I texted my mom that I might be late and settled in to wait. The airport was packed with holiday travelers, everyone looking stressed and tired. After about an hour of scrolling through social media and playing games on my phone, I decided to walk around a bit to stretch my legs. That's when I first noticed him. He was maybe in his 40s, average height, with thinning brown hair and glasses. Nothing remarkable about him really, except for the way he was staring at me. Not the casual glance of a bored traveler. This was focused, intentional. When our eyes met, he didn't look away like a normal person would. He just kept staring with this blank expression. I shrugged it off. Airports are weird places, and people get zoned out. I continued my walk, stopping at a newsstand to browse magazines. When I looked up, he was at the other end of the shop, pretending to look at candy bars, but his eyes were on me again. A chill ran down my spine, but I told myself I was being ridiculous. I headed back to my gate, and about 10 minutes later, I saw him sit down a few rows away, still watching me. At this point, I was getting seriously uncomfortable. I decided to go to the bathroom just to get away for a minute and clear my head. Big mistake. I was washing my hands when the bathroom door opened and, you guessed it, he walked in. He went straight to the urinal, but I could see in the mirror that he wasn't using it. He was just standing there. Then he started checking under the stall doors, one by one, like he was looking for someone, like he was looking for me. I dried my hands as quickly as possible and got the hell out of there. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I headed straight for the security desk near my gate and stood there, pretending to ask about my flight while keeping an eye on the bathroom entrance. When he came out, he scanned the crowd, and I ducked behind a pillar. Just as I was contemplating telling a security guard, the announcement came. All flights to Cleveland were cancelled due to the snowstorm that had intensified while I'd been in the airport. Perfect timing. The snow had picked up dramatically, and they were closing runways. The gate agent apologized and said they could rebook me for tomorrow afternoon. I called my mom, who was disappointed but understanding. Then I called Angela, hoping I could still make it to her party, but she had already left for her friend's place across town. With the storm getting worse, she suggested I just get a hotel near the airport and try again tomorrow. That's when the real nightmare began. Everyone from my flight, and apparently every other canceled flight, was trying to book hotel rooms. I called 6 hotels near the airport, all full. The 7th had a single room available for $400. As a college student working part-time at the campus bookstore, that was more than half my monthly rent. I was standing at the customer service desk, feeling completely lost, when an older woman behind me tapped my shoulder. "Try the Waypoint Hostel," she said. "It's about a mile from here, cheap and clean. My daughter stays there when she travels." I'd never stayed in a hostel before, but I was desperate. I called and they had one bed left in a shared room for $60. Sold. By the time I got outside, the snow was coming down in thick sheets. I couldn't see more than 20 feet ahead. The taxi line was impossibly long, and rideshare prices were surging to 3 times the normal rate. I decided to walk. It was only a mile, and I had my winter coat. That mile felt like 10. The wind cut through my clothes like a knife, and my wheeled suitcase kept getting stuck in the snow. By the time I reached the hostel, a converted old house with a small sign out front, I was soaked and freezing. The guy at the desk was maybe a few years older than me, with a beard and a bored expression. He took my credit card, handed me a key, and pointed me to my room on the 2nd floor. "You're in room 4, he said. "Last bed on the right. Checkout's at 11. Room 4 had 6 bunk beds, 4 of which were occupied by sleeping figures. One guy was sitting up reading something on his phone. He nodded at me as I came in, then went back to his screen. I found my bed, bottom bunk thank God, and quickly changed into dry clothes in the attached bathroom. By now it was almost 10 o'clock. I texted Angela that I was safe, set my alarm for 7, and tried to sleep. Despite my exhaustion, sleep wouldn't come. The room was too warm, someone was snoring, and my mind kept replaying the creepy encounters with the staring man at the airport. I must have finally dozed off around midnight because I remember hearing distant fireworks and thinking, "Happy New Year." I woke up to the sound of the door opening. The room was dark except for the glow of an exit sign in the hallway, casting everything in a dim red light. I squinted at my phone. 4 minutes past 3 in the morning. The door closed softly, and someone moved into the room. That's when my blood turned to ice. Even in the red-tinted darkness, I recognized his silhouette immediately. The thinning hair, the glasses, the man from the airport, here in my room at 3 in the morning on New Year's Day. This couldn't be a coincidence. No way. He must have followed me. How else would he end up in the exact same hostel, the exact same room? There were dozens of places to stay in the area. This was deliberate. I lay perfectly still, controlling my breathing, pretending to be asleep while watching through barely open eyes. He moved slowly through the room, checking the beds, looking for an empty one, or looking for me. I couldn't tell. My heart was beating so loudly I was sure he could hear it. He stopped at the foot of my bed, and for one horrifying moment, I thought he was going to reach for me. Instead, he moved to the last empty bed, the one across from mine, and sat down. He took off his shoes, his coat, then his glasses, placing them on the small shelf beside the bed. Then he lay down, pulled the blanket over himself, and went still. I didn't move a muscle. My mind was racing with terrifying possibilities. Was he planning to wait until I was asleep and then, what? Rob me? Hurt me? Something worse? Or was this all just a horrible coincidence? Maybe he really was just a guy whose flight got cancelled, who happened to pick the same hostel, who happened to get the last bed in the same room. But those stares, the way he checked the bathroom stalls, it felt targeted, predatory. For over an hour I lay frozen, listening to his breathing, trying to determine if he was really asleep. Eventually, his breaths became deep and regular. Around 4 in the morning, I made my decision. I couldn't stay there. Moving with a slowness that physically hurt, I eased myself out of bed. I'd slept in my clothes, thankful now for that decision. My backpack was under the bed. I slid it out inch by inch. My suitcase was by the door. I'd have to leave it. All my important stuff was in my backpack anyway. It took me almost 20 minutes to reach the door. Every creak of the floor, every rustle of fabric sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. When I finally reached the door, I turned the knob with excruciating care, pulled it open just enough to slip through, and closed it behind me with the softest click. I didn't breathe properly until I was outside. The snow had stopped, but the temperature had dropped well below freezing. The streets were deserted, covered in untouched white. I had no plan except to get as far away as possible. I walked for what felt like hours, but was probably only 30 minutes. The cold was brutal, seeping through my clothes, but fear kept me moving. I finally spotted a bagel shop with lights on, an employee visible inside, preparing for the morning. The sign said they opened at 5. I checked my phone, 4:47, close enough. I knocked on the window, probably looking like a complete lunatic, a wide-eyed kid with a backpack shivering in the pre-dawn darkness of New Year's Day. The guy inside looked startled but came to the door. "Please," I said, my voice shaking from cold and fear. "My hotel had a fire alarm. Can I just sit inside until you open? I'm freezing." He hesitated, then nodded and let me in. I ordered a coffee when they officially opened, then another, sitting there until the sun came up and more places started to open. I called the hostel later that morning, explained that I had a family emergency and had to leave suddenly. They said they'd hold my suitcase for me to pick up. I never went back for it. I bought new clothes at a store that opened at 10, booked a different hotel for that night, and flew home the next day. I never saw the man again, never reported it either. What would I say? A guy looked at me weird and then coincidentally stayed at the same hostel. It sounds ridiculous even now, but I know what I felt. That instinctive, primal fear that makes your skin crawl and your hair stand on end. The certainty that you're being hunted. 3 years later, I still check behind me in public places. I never stay in shared accommodations. I keep my location services turned off on my phone. I always make sure someone knows exactly where I am when I travel. Maybe it was all innocent. Maybe he was just a socially awkward guy who happened to make the same choices I did that night. But the uncertainty is the worst part. Not knowing if I narrowly escaped something terrible, or if I panicked over nothing. I'll never know what his intentions were. And somehow, that's more terrifying than any confirmed danger could ever be. Story 9. I've never shared this before, not with my therapist, not with my closest friends. Only my wife knows the full story, and she's the one who suggested I write it down. She thinks it might help me process what happened, but I'm not so sure. Even typing this makes my hands shake. It's been 3 years since that night, and I still can't drive alone on highways after dark. It was supposed to be a relaxing weekend. That's the worst part. How normal everything seemed at first. My buddy Scott had inherited his grandfather's cabin near Pinewood, this tiny speck of a town about 4 hours north of where I lived. He'd spent most of the summer fixing it up and invited a few of us to come check it out for a weekend of fishing and drinking beer by the fire. I was the only one who could make it that particular weekend, so I decided to head up Friday after work. I remember being in a good mood as I threw my duffel bag in the trunk of my Subaru. The weather forecast was perfect. I had a cooler of snacks and I'd downloaded some new podcasts for the drive. Traffic was heavy leaving the city, but once I hit the interstate, things started moving. By the time I turned onto Route 16, the two-lane highway that would take me most of the way to Pinewood, the sun was already setting. My GPS signal started getting spotty about an hour into the drive on Route 16. I wasn't too worried since Scott had sent detailed directions. The highway was practically deserted by then. I think I'd seen maybe 3 other cars in the last 45 minutes. That's the thing about these remote areas. Once night falls, it feels like you're the only person left in the world. I was just starting to feel the highway hypnosis setting in when I spotted him, a figure standing on the shoulder about 100 yards ahead, thumb out. My headlights illuminated him gradually, tall, thin, probably in his 30s, wearing jeans and a dark jacket. He had a small backpack slung over one shoulder. I never pick up hitchhikers. Never. I've watched enough true crime documentaries to know better, but something about being alone on that empty road made me slow down. Maybe it was the chill in the air. Temperatures were supposed to drop into the low 40s that night. Maybe it was the fact that the nearest town was over 30 miles away, according to my last road sign. Or maybe it was just that this guy didn't look particularly threatening. Whatever the reason, I pulled over. He jogged up to my passenger window, and I rolled it down halfway. Up close, he looked normal enough. Short brown hair, clean-shaven, no obvious red flags. "Hey man, thanks for stopping," he said. "I'm trying to get to Millerton. My car broke down about 5 miles back." Millerton was a small town about 20 miles ahead, right on my route. I hesitated for a moment, then made the decision I'll regret for the rest of my life. "I can take you that far," I said. "I'm heading past there." "Appreciate it," he replied, and I unlocked the door. He introduced himself as Jake and settled into the passenger seat. The first 10 minutes were filled with normal small talk, where I was headed, why he was out here, visiting a friend, car trouble, no cell service. But something felt off from the beginning. He sat too still. His responses came a beat too late, like he was carefully choosing each word, and he never seemed to blink. I tried to focus on the road ahead, but I kept glancing over. Each time he was staring straight ahead with this unnervingly fixed expression. The highway stretched before us, dark trees on either side making it feel like we were driving through a tunnel. The only light came from my headlights and the occasional reflective road sign. "So what's in Pinewood?" he asked after a long silence. I don't remember telling him exactly where I was going. "Just visiting a friend's cabin," I said, keeping it vague. My stomach had started to knot up. "Nice, remote area, good place to get away from everything." The way he emphasized everything made my skin crawl. As we drove, the radio started to lose signal, fading into static. I tried a few stations, but eventually gave up and turned it off. The silence in the car was suffocating. "Mind if I check? Something on your phone?" Jake suddenly asked. "Mine's dead." "No service out here," I lied, even though I'd had at least 1 bar the last time I checked. There was no way I was handing him my phone. He nodded slowly, then turned to look out the window. "Beautiful night. So dark you could get away with anything out here." My knuckles were white on the steering wheel. We were still at least 10 miles from Millerton, and every instinct was screaming at me to get this guy out of my car. I considered pulling over and telling him to get out, but the thought of being stopped on this deserted road with him seemed even worse. When my phone chimed with a text message, we both jumped. I glanced at the screen on my dashboard where the notification appeared. Scott. "Hey man, you on your way? Just saw on the news there's some dangerous guy they're looking for in the area. Escaped prisoner or something. Be careful on the road." Jake leaned forward slightly, and I knew he'd seen it too. When I looked over, the corner of his mouth had turned up in what might have been a smile. My blood ran cold. "Friend checking in?" he asked casually. I mumbled something affirmative, my mind racing. The nearest town was still miles away. I considered speeding up, but the road was too dark, too winding. I couldn't risk a crash out here. "You know?" Jake said, his voice dropping lower. "I always wonder why people pick up strangers. Aren't you afraid of who might get in your car?" I swallowed hard. "Just trying to help someone out." "That's nice of you," he replied. "Most people wouldn't stop. Most people are smarter than that." My hands were sweating now. I wiped them one at a time on my jeans, never letting go of the wheel completely. The turnoff for Scott's cabin was coming up in about 5 miles, a small dirt road that would take me another 2 miles into the woods. I had planned to drop Jake in Millerton, but that would mean another 20 minutes in the car with him. "Actually," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "I just remembered I need to make a stop up here. There's a gas station at the Millerton exit. I can let you out there." Jake didn't respond for a long moment. Then he shifted in his seat, turning toward me. "No need to change your plans on my account," he said. "I'm enjoying the company." The highway seemed to stretch endlessly ahead. Trees pressed in from both sides, their shadows dancing in my headlights. I was searching desperately for any sign of civilization, another car, a house, anything. When I finally saw the small green sign for the Millerton exit, relief flooded through me. I put on my blinker, slowing down. "This is you," I said firmly. Jake didn't move. I was thinking I might go a bit further. My exit was approaching. I had seconds to decide. In a split-second decision I now recognize as monumentally stupid, I thought the cabin would be safer than being alone on the road with him. Scott would be there. 2 against 1. We could call the police if needed. "Fine," I said, "but I'm meeting my friend at the cabin. He's expecting me." Jake smiled. "Sounds perfect." I took the exit for Pinewood, my hands shaking so badly I could barely steer. The road became narrower, rougher. Jake had gone quiet again, but I could feel him watching me. When I turned onto the dirt road leading to the cabin, my headlights illuminated the no trespassing signs nailed to trees on either side. The cabin was completely isolated, surrounded by dense forest. As we bumped along the uneven track, I tried to text Scott with one hand, something like, "911, dangerous guy in car with me." But I couldn't manage it without Jake noticing. The cabin appeared ahead, a dark silhouette against the night sky. I felt a surge of relief when I saw lights inside and Scott's truck parked out front. Jake seemed to notice it too. His posture stiffened slightly. I pulled up beside Scott's truck and killed the engine. For a moment, neither of us moved. "Thanks for the ride," Jake finally said. "Nice place." "My friend's waiting," I replied, opening my door. "Good luck with everything." I grabbed my phone and duffel from the back seat, trying to appear casual while my heart hammered in my chest. Jake got out too, shouldering his small backpack. "Mind if I use your bathroom before I head out?" he asked. "It's been a long walk." Before I could answer, the cabin door opened and Scott stepped out onto the porch, backlit by the warm light from inside. I've never been so happy to see anyone in my life. "Mark, about time, man," was getting worried. I tried to signal with my eyes that something was wrong, but Scott was already looking at Jake with curiosity. "This is Jake," I said, my voice tight. "His car broke down. I gave him a ride." Jake extended his hand to Scott, all friendliness. "Just need to use the bathroom if that's okay, then I'll get out of your hair." Scott, completely oblivious to the danger, nodded. "Sure, man, come on in." As we entered the cabin, I managed to catch Scott's arm and whisper, "That text about the dangerous guy, is that him?" Scott looked confused. "What text?" My stomach dropped. I pulled out my phone to show him, but there was no message from Scott about an escaped prisoner. Nothing, just a text saying ETA from hours earlier. I looked up to see Jake watching us from across the room, that same unsettling half smile on his face. He'd heard everything. "Bathroom?" he prompted. Scott pointed down a hallway. "First door on the left." As soon as Jake disappeared, I grabbed Scott's arm. "We need to call the police. That guy, something's wrong with him. He knew about a text you never sent." Scott looked skeptical, but reached for his phone. "No signal up here, remember? Landline's not hooked up yet either." "Then we need to get out of here," I hissed. "Dude, calm down. We can't just leave some random guy stranded in the middle of nowhere because you got spooked." Before I could argue further, Jake returned. He thanked us and headed for the door, but then stopped. "Actually, I hate to ask, but it's freezing out there. Any chance I could crash on your couch? I can head out first thing in the morning." Scott, the idiot, agreed before I could object. "Sure, man, we've got plenty of room." I spent the next hour in a state of barely concealed panic, watching Jake's every move as Scott offered him a beer and chatted about the cabin renovations. Jake was charming, funny even, asking all the right questions and seeming genuinely interested. But every time Scott looked away, Jake's eyes would find mine, cold and calculating. When Scott suggested we all turn in around midnight, I was exhausted from the constant vigilance. Jake was given the couch, while Scott and I had bedrooms on opposite sides of the cabin. I locked my bedroom door, pushed a chair against it for good measure, and sat on the edge of the bed, listening to every creak and groan of the old cabin. I must have dozed off despite my fear, because I woke with a start to the sound of my doorknob turning quietly. The chair kept the door from opening more than an inch. Through the crack, I could see a sliver of Jake's face, illuminated by moonlight from the hallway window. "You shouldn't have picked me up," he whispered through the gap. I scrambled backwards on the bed as he pushed harder against the door, the chair legs scraping on the wooden floor. I grabbed my phone to call for help, but there was still no signal. The pressure on the door suddenly stopped. I heard footsteps moving away, then silence. For several minutes, I sat frozen, straining to hear any sound. Then came Scott's voice from across the cabin, a surprised, "Hey!" followed by a thud and silence. I moved the chair and crept to my door, easing it open. The hallway was empty. I made my way toward Scott's room, every nerve ending screaming danger. His door stood partially open, but it was too dark to see inside. "Scott," I whispered. No response. I pushed the door wider, using my phone's flashlight. The beam swept across an empty, undisturbed bed. Scott wasn't there. A floorboard creaked behind me. I whirled around to see Jake standing at the end of the hallway, something glinting in his hand. A knife. "I was hoping you'd come out," he said, his voice eerily calm. "Makes things more interesting." I slammed Scott's door shut and locked it, frantically searching for a weapon, an escape, anything. The window was my only option. I forced it open and looked out, about a 15-foot drop to the ground below. Behind me, the door shuddered as Jake threw his weight against it. The wood around the lock began to splinter. I had seconds, not minutes. I threw one leg over the windowsill, then the other, hanging from my hands before dropping to the ground below. Pain shot through my ankle as I landed, but adrenaline kept me moving. I limped into the tree line just as I heard the door give way above me. Seconds later, Jake's face appeared at the window, moonlight reflecting off his eyes as he scanned the darkness. I ran, through underbrush that tore at my clothes, over fallen logs, my injured ankle screaming with every step. I had no idea where Scott was, if he was even still alive. All I knew was that I needed to put as much distance between myself and the cabin as possible. Behind me, I heard Jake crashing through the forest. "You can't run forever," he called, his voice carrying through the trees. "I'll find you." His laughter echoed in the darkness, seeming to come from everywhere at once. I changed direction repeatedly, hoping to throw him off, but the unfamiliar terrain slowed me down. Each time I thought I'd lost him, I'd hear him again, closer than before. After what felt like hours of this terrifying cat-and-mouse game, I stumbled onto a road. Not the dirt track that led to the cabin, but a paved county road I didn't recognize. My legs were on the verge of giving out. Blood soaked my sock from where my ankle had been sliced open during my escape. In the distance, I saw headlights approaching. I stumbled into the middle of the road, waving my arms frantically. The car slowed, then stopped, an older couple peering out at me with concern. They took one look at my bloody, disheveled state and let me in. We drove straight to the Pinewood Sheriff's Station. When officers returned to the cabin with me, there was no sign of Jake or Scott. just a kitchen knife embedded in Scott's bedroom door and signs of a struggle in the living room. They found Scott 3 days later, alive but badly injured, dumped in a ravine 5 miles from the cabin. Jake was never found. The police said there was no record of an escaped prisoner in the area that night. No similar incidents, no trace of whoever or whatever Jake really was. I still don't understand how he knew about a text that never existed. I don't understand why he let me escape when he could have easily caught me in those woods. Sometimes I think he enjoyed the chase more than he would have enjoyed the kill. I moved to a different state afterward, changed my phone number. I never drive alone at night anymore, and I certainly never pick up hitchhikers. But sometimes when I'm in my car and glance in the rearview mirror, I swear I can see his unblinking eyes watching me from the back seat. Story 10. I still get chills typing this. It happened 3 months ago when I was home alone. My parents had gone to some charity gala downtown, the kind where my mom spends 2 hours getting ready and my dad complains about wearing a tie the entire time. They don't go out much, so I was actually excited to have the house to myself for once. Just me, some microwave popcorn, and whatever horror movie I felt like watching without my mom walking in during the scariest parts saying, "Why do you watch this stuff?" Our house in Oakwood is pretty old, like built in the 1970s old. It has all those classic creaks and groans that make you question your sanity when you're alone. That night was especially bad because a massive storm had rolled in. The wind was howling so hard the windows rattled and rain was pounding against the roof like someone was throwing handfuls of pebbles. I'd settled on the couch with the strangers. I'd seen it like 5 times already, but something about watching home invasion movies when you're actually home alone gives you this weird thrill, you know? Like when you're a kid and you purposely look under the bed, even though you're terrified of what might be there. Around 9:30, during one of the quieter scenes in the movie, I heard this weird scratching sound coming from the front door. At first, I just ignored it. Branches from our oak tree scrape against the house all the time when it's windy. But then it happened again, more deliberate, like someone was dragging their nails across the door. I paused the movie and just sat there listening. The scratching stopped, but my heart was already racing. I tried telling myself it was nothing, just the storm playing tricks on me. But I couldn't focus on the movie anymore. The scratching came back a few minutes later, and I knew I wouldn't be able to relax until I checked. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight before creeping toward the front door. Our entryway has this narrow window next to the door that lets you see who's outside, but it was so dark and rainy I couldn't make out anything except the porch light reflecting off the wet driveway. "Hello?" I called through the door, feeling stupid immediately. Like some axe murderer would be like, "Oh yes, hello, just here to kill you, mind if I come in?" No response, obviously. I hesitated for a good minute before finally working up the courage to open the door, just a cracked chain lock still on. The porch was completely empty. The rain was coming down in sheets and the wind nearly yanked the door from my hand. I quickly shut it, double-checking the lock. As I turned to head back to the living room, I caught a glimpse of something that made my blood freeze. There, pressed against the window on the side of the house, was a face. Not just any face, a pale, almost white face with the most unsettling smile I've ever seen. The eyes were wide open, unblinking, staring directly at me like they could see through me. I screamed and dropped my phone, the flashlight beam bouncing wildly across the floor. When I looked back up, the face was gone. Just the dark window with raindrops streaming down it. I scrambled to grab my phone, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold it. I tried calling Ashley, my best friend who lives about 10 minutes away, but she didn't pick up. I left her a frantic voicemail about someone being outside the house, begging her to call me back. The logical part of my brain was trying to convince me that I'd imagined it, that it was just my reflection or a shadow from the storm. I'd been watching a scary movie, after all. But I knew what I saw. That face wasn't human. At least it didn't look human. It was too wrong. I went around the house making sure every door and window was locked. As I was checking the back door in the kitchen, I heard that scratching sound again, but this time it was coming from the back of the house. My heart felt like it was going to burst out of my chest. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen drawer, the biggest one we had, and held it with both hands as I approached the back door. The scratching stopped. I slowly peeked through the blinds, careful not to get too close to the glass. There was nothing on the back porch, but something caught my eye near the tree line at the edge of our property. A shadow, darker than the darkness around it, moving between the trees. It wasn't the wind moving the branches. This was something deliberately shifting from one tree to another, like it was watching me. I backed away from the window, knife still clutched in my sweaty hand. I tried calling 911, but the line just kept ringing and ringing. I hung up and tried again with the same result before the call suddenly disconnected. When I looked at my phone, I had no service bars. The storm must have knocked out a cell tower or something. That's when I remembered Max. My little brother was supposed to be asleep upstairs. He's only 10 and sleeps like the dead, so he probably hadn't heard anything. But suddenly I was terrified for him. What if whatever was outside had somehow gotten in earlier? What if it wasn't outside anymore? I ran upstairs, taking the steps two at a time, and burst into Max's room. His bed was empty. The covers were thrown back like he'd gotten up in a hurry. "Max?" I whispered, then louder, "Max?" No answer. I checked the bathroom, my parents' room, my room. He wasn't anywhere upstairs. Panic was really setting in now. I was having trouble breathing, and my chest felt tight like someone was sitting on it. As I stood at the top of the stairs, debating whether to keep searching or barricade myself in a room, I heard something, a muffled crying sound coming from somewhere downstairs. It sounded like Max. "Max?" I called out. The crying got a little louder. I followed the sound, knife still in hand, moving as quietly as I could. It seemed to be coming from the basement. Our basement is unfinished, just concrete floors, exposed pipes, and boxes of Christmas decorations and old clothes. My parents keep talking about renovating it, but they never do. The basement door was slightly ajar, which was weird because we always keep it closed. As I pushed it open, the hinges creaked so loudly I froze, sure that anyone in the house would have heard it. "Max?" I whispered down the dark stairwell. I could still hear crying, but it was quieter now, almost like whoever was making the sound was trying to stifle it. I felt along the wall for the light switch, but when I flipped it, nothing happened. The power must have gone out in part of the house. I turned on my phone flashlight again and started carefully making my way down the stairs, testing each step before putting my full weight on it to avoid any creaks. The beam from my flashlight bounced around the basement, creating more shadows than light. The crying was definitely coming from the far corner behind some stacked boxes. "Max, it's me, Emily. Are you okay?" I called softly. As I moved closer, I could make out a small figure huddled in the corner. It was Max, his knees pulled up to his chest, his face buried in his arms. "Max! Oh my God, what are you doing down here?" I rushed over to him, relief flooding through me. He looked up, his face streaked with tears, eyes wide with fear. He opened his mouth to say something, but before any words came out, I felt a hand clamp down on my wrist, a hand that wasn't Max's. I whirled around and found myself face to face with someone in a dark hoodie. Their grip on my wrist was like iron, and I could feel the cold edge of something metal pressing against my skin. "It's all over now," they whispered, and even through my terror I recognized the voice. It was distorted, like they were trying to disguise it, but there was something familiar about it. The last thing I remember is seeing the glint of a knife in the beam of my dropped phone, and then everything went black. I woke up in the hospital 2 days later. According to the police, our neighbor had seen someone suspicious hanging around our house and called 911 when he couldn't reach anyone inside. The officers found Max and me unconscious in the basement. The doctors said we'd been drugged with something that causes temporary memory loss. The part that haunts me most? They never found who did it. No fingerprints, no evidence of forced entry, nothing stolen. Just Max and me, drugged in our own basement and a half-open front door. The police think it was probably someone we know. The lack of forced entry suggests we might have let them in, or they had a key. They've interviewed all our friends and family, but they're no closer to figuring it out. I still can't remember anything between seeing that knife and waking up in the hospital. Max says he doesn't remember going to the basement at all. The last thing he recalls is someone tapping on his bedroom window, which he thought was just a tree branch. We don't live in that house anymore. My parents sold it within a month, and we moved to an apartment in the city. I still have nightmares about that face in the window, that unnaturally wide smile. Sometimes I wake up hearing that scratching sound, even though I know it's not real. The worst part is not knowing why. Why us? Why didn't they hurt us more seriously? What did they want? I keep thinking I should remember something, some clue about who it was. But there's just this black hole where those memories should be. I'm writing this from my new bedroom, with its view of the busy street below rather than dark trees. I still sleep with the lights on. I still check the locks 3 times before bed. And I still can't shake the feeling that whoever or whatever was in our house that night is still out there waiting. And sometimes when I catch my reflection in a window at night, I swear I see that same terrible smile looking back at me. Story 11. I still can't sleep without the lights on, and it's been 3 months since that night. I've tried telling my parents what happened, but they just think I'm making it up or that I was watching too many horror movies. They don't believe me. They can't see what's happened to Max. They don't notice how he's different now. But I know. I was there. It was a Friday night in October when everything went to hell. Mom and Dad were going to some fancy work dinner for Dad's company, and I got stuck babysitting my 10-year-old brother Max. Usually, I'd complain about missing out on hanging with my friends, but there was this huge storm coming, so everyone had canceled their plans anyway. Our house is this massive Victorian thing on Blackwood Lane that my parents bought for a steal last year. It's over 100 years old with all these creaky floorboards and weird little nooks. Mom thought it had character. Dad liked the price. I always thought it felt off, like it was watching us. That night the wind was already picking up when my parents left around 7. Dad gave me the usual lecture about emergency numbers and not having friends over, while Mom fussed over Max's bedtime routine. They promised they'd be back by midnight, and then they were gone. At first, everything was normal. Max and I made pizza rolls and watched cartoons in the living room. He was being his usual annoying self, asking a million questions during the show and trying to make me play his stupid board games. By 9, I told him it was bedtime. But Mom lets me stay up until 9:30 on weekends, he whined. Well, I'm not Mom, I told him, and it's already storming. You know you get scared. He finally trudged upstairs after I promised to check on him in a bit. I settled on the couch with some old horror movie on Netflix. Nothing too scary, just something to pass the time. The storm was getting worse outside, rain lashing against the windows and thunder rumbling in the distance. The house felt weirdly quiet in between thunderclaps. Too quiet. You know that feeling when you're alone but don't feel alone? That's how it was. Around 10:15, my phone buzzed with a text. I figured it was my friend Amber or maybe my parents checking in, but when I looked at the screen, it was from a number I didn't recognize. Do you know where your brother is? My stomach dropped. I tried to tell myself it was just some prank, probably one of my friends messing with me because they knew I was babysitting. But something about it felt wrong. I texted back, "Who is this?" but got no response. I decided to check on Max just to ease my mind. The upstairs hallway was dark except for the little dinosaur nightlight plugged in near the bathroom. Max's door was cracked open just how I'd left it after tucking him in. I pushed it open and peeked inside. He was there, curled up under his Star Wars comforter, just the top of his head visible. I let out the breath I'd been holding and watched him for a moment. The room was cold, probably that draft from the window that Dad kept promising to fix. I pulled his blanket up a little higher and went back downstairs, trying to shake off the weird feeling. I had just sat back down when my phone buzzed again. Same unknown number. He's not in bed anymore. My blood went cold. I'd just seen him there. This wasn't funny anymore. I texted back, "Stop it," and tried to focus on the movie, but I couldn't. What if something was wrong? What if someone was actually in our house? I ran back upstairs, taking the steps two at a time. I burst into Max's room and flipped on the light. The bed was empty. The covers were pulled back, but Max wasn't there. "Max!" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "Max, this isn't funny. Come out right now." No answer. I checked under the bed, in the closet, even in the bathroom across the hall. Nothing. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I tried calling my parents, but the call wouldn't go through, probably because of the storm. I was searching the guest room when my phone buzzed again. Check the attic. The attic. We never went up there. It was this cramped, dusty space filled with junk from the previous owners that my parents kept saying they'd clean out but never did. Max was terrified of it. He said he heard scratching up there at night. Part of me wanted to just run out of the house and go to the neighbors. But what if Max was actually up there? What if he'd somehow sleepwalked up to the attic? I couldn't leave him. The pull-down attic stairs were at the end of the upstairs hallway. They were always stuck, and it took all my strength to yank them down. The rusty hinges screamed as the wooden steps unfolded. I turned on my phone's flashlight and stared up into the darkness. "Max," I called. "Are you up there? You're scaring me." Something rustled in the darkness above. It could have been the wind, but it sounded like movement, like someone shifting their weight. I started climbing the stairs, each step creaking under my weight. The air got thicker as I reached the top, dusty and stale with this weird metallic smell I couldn't place. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating old boxes, a broken rocking chair, and piles of yellowed newspapers. And there in the far corner was Max. He was crouched with his back to me, rocking slightly back and forth. He was still in his pajamas, his bare feet dirty from the attic floor. "Max!" I gasped, relief flooding through me. "What are you doing up here? You scared me half to death." He didn't respond, didn't even seem to hear me. I moved closer, stepping carefully around the junk. "Max, hey buddy, let's go back downstairs. It's cold up here." When I put my hand on his shoulder, he went completely still. Then, slowly, he turned around. I'll never forget the look on his face. His eyes were wide open but empty somehow, like he was looking at something 1,000 miles away. His face was slack, expressionless, but his lips were moving, whispering something I couldn't hear. "Max?" My voice came out as a whisper. "What's wrong?" That's when I heard it. Footsteps on the attic stairs behind me. Slow, deliberate steps. My body went rigid with fear, but when I spun around, flashlight raised, there was nothing there. The stairs were empty, but the footsteps continued, getting closer, as if whatever was making them was invisible. Then the whispers started. At first I thought it was just the wind or my imagination, but they grew louder, multiple voices overlapping, speaking too fast to understand. They seemed to be coming from every direction, surrounding us. "We need to get out of here," I said, grabbing Max's arm. "Come on." He didn't budge. Instead, he looked directly at me for the first time, and what came out of his mouth wasn't his voice. It was deep, rough, like someone dragging stones across concrete. "It's too late," he growled. "They're here." His face twisted into this horrible smile, too wide, too many teeth. And then he lunged at me. I screamed and stumbled backward, dropping my phone. The flashlight beams spun crazily across the attic, and in those flashes, I swear I saw the shadows moving. Not just shifting with the light, but moving on their own, stretching and reaching toward us. Max grabbed my wrist with a strength he shouldn't have had. His fingers dug in so hard I thought my bones would snap. His eyes were completely black now, no whites at all, and that terrible smile never left his face. "They've been waiting," he said in that awful voice. "Waiting for you. For us." I wrenched my arm away and scrambled toward the stairs, but something caught my ankle. I looked down, expecting to see Max's hand, but there was nothing visible, just the unmistakable sensation of cold fingers wrapped around my leg. The whispers grew louder, almost deafening now. I could almost make out words, horrible things about pain and darkness and hunger. I kicked frantically and managed to break free. I grabbed my phone and lurched toward the attic stairs. "Max, please," I begged. "We have to go." For just a second, I thought I saw a flicker of my brother in his eyes, scared, confused. But then it was gone, replaced by that emptiness. "Jenna," he said, and this time it was his voice, small and frightened. "There's so many of them. They've been here the whole time, watching us, waiting." The temperature in the attic plummeted. I could see my breath clouding in front of me. The shadows in the corners seemed to deepen, to pulse with a life of their own. Max started convulsing, his small body jerking violently. I ran to him, trying to hold him still, terrified he was having some kind of seizure. His skin was ice cold. "Max, Max, look at me." His eyes rolled back in his head, and then he went completely limp. For a horrifying moment, I thought he was dead. Then his eyes snapped open again, and he smiled at me. But it wasn't Max's smile. It wasn't Max looking at me at all. "We have him now," he said, his voice a chorus of whispers. "And soon, we'll have you too." I don't remember running down the attic stairs. I don't remember falling and twisting my ankle. I just remember finding myself at the bottom of the stairs, sobbing as Max walked calmly down after me, moving with a grace that wasn't his own. My parents found us like that when they came home early because of the storm, me huddled against the wall, crying hysterically, and Max standing over me, perfectly calm, telling them I'd had a bad nightmare and gotten confused. They believed him. Of course they did. He was acting so normal, so concerned about his crazy sister. But when they weren't looking, he would smile at me with that wrong smile, and sometimes, just sometimes, I'd catch a glimpse of something else looking out through his eyes. It's been 3 months. No one believes me about what happened in the attic. My parents took me to a therapist who talked about stress and anxiety and overactive imaginations. They're talking about medication now, but I know what I saw. I know what happened to my brother. He still sleeps in the room next to mine. Sometimes I hear him talking at night, whispering to something I can't see. Sometimes he stands outside my door for hours, not moving, not making a sound, and my phone still gets texts from that unknown number. They're always the same now. "We're waiting for you, Jenna. Come back to the attic. Come see what we've become." I don't know how much longer I can pretend everything's normal. I don't know how to save my brother. I don't even know if there's anything left of him to save. All I know is that whatever was waiting in our attic that night, whatever had been hiding there all along, it has Max now, and it's still hungry. Story 12. I still can't believe what happened to me last month. I've been trying to make sense of it, but I can't. I haven't told many people because, honestly, who would believe me? But I need to get this off my chest, so here goes. I'm a junior at Willow Creek College, and I'd been at a study group that ran late. It was around 11 at night, pouring rain, one of those heavy spring downpours where your wipers can barely keep up. I decided to take a shortcut back to my apartment that my roommate Jen had mentioned. Big mistake. I'm usually good with directions, but between the darkness and the rain, I must have missed a turn somewhere. My GPS kept cutting out, typical for the rural areas around Willow Creek, and before I knew it, I was on some narrow country road I'd never seen before. No streetlights, just thick woods on both sides, and my headlights barely cutting through the sheets of rain. I was starting to worry about my gas. The light had been on for a while, when I saw something that made me slam on my brakes. There was a woman standing on the side of the road, just standing there in the pouring rain. No umbrella, no raincoat, nothing. Just a pale blue dress that looked soaked through. I pulled over, rolled down my window, and called out to her. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" I remember thinking it was weird that she didn't look wet despite standing in the downpour. Her hair wasn't even plastered to her face like it should have been. She approached my car slowly. She was maybe in her 30s with this really pale skin and dark hair pulled back. Something about her eyes bothered me. They seemed too intense, too focused. But I figured she was just scared or cold. "I'm trying to get home," she said. Her voice was soft, almost like she was speaking from far away, even though she was right next to my car. "I've been trying for so long." I offered her a ride, and she directed me to turn down this dirt road I hadn't even noticed. It was barely visible, just a gap in the trees with tire tracks leading into darkness. My car bumped along for maybe half a mile before a house appeared in my headlights. It was a 2-story farmhouse, white paint peeling, porch sagging on one side. No lights were on, and honestly, it didn't look like anyone had lived there for years. I remember thinking this couldn't possibly be where she lived, but she nodded and said, "This is it. This is home." I pulled up to the front and put the car in park. The rain had somehow gotten even heavier, drumming on my roof like someone was throwing handfuls of pebbles. The woman didn't move to get out. She just stared at the house with this expression I couldn't read. "Thank you for bringing me this far," she said, "but I need one more favor." Looking back, this is where I should have driven away. Every instinct was screaming at me that something was wrong, but I didn't listen. "There's a photograph in the living room on the mantel," she continued. "Could you get it for me? I can't go in myself." I asked her why she couldn't go in, and she just shook her head. "Please," she whispered. "It's important." I don't know why I agreed. Maybe it was the pleading in her voice, or maybe I just wanted to help and get back on the road. I grabbed my phone for a flashlight, pulled my jacket over my head, and ran through the rain to the porch. The front door wasn't even locked. It creaked open at my touch, which should have been another warning sign. The smell hit me first, musty, like old books and dust and something else I couldn't identify. My phone flashlight showed cobwebs in the corners and sheets draped over furniture. Clearly, no one had been here in years. I called back to the woman. "Are you sure this is your house?" She was still sitting in my car, watching me through the windshield. She nodded. The floorboards creaked under my feet as I moved deeper into the house. The living room was to my right, an old couch covered in a sheet, a coffee table with a thick layer of dust, and a stone fireplace with a wooden mantel. And there, just like she said, was a photograph in a silver frame. I wiped away the dust with my sleeve and angled my phone to see it better. That's when my blood went cold. It was her, the woman in my car. Same pale blue dress, same hairstyle, same intense eyes. But the photo was obviously decades old. The faded sepia tones, the style of the frame. And there was a date written in the corner, May 15, 1972. My hands started shaking so bad I almost dropped the frame. I turned it over and saw something written on the back. Elizabeth, coming home from the hospital. May 15th, the day of the accident. I don't remember running back to the car. I just remember the rain soaking through my jacket, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst. When I got to my car, I yanked the door open and fell into the driver's seat, gasping. "Did you find it?" she asked, and her voice made me jump because it came from behind me. She was in my back seat, not outside where I'd left her, but inside my locked car. I screamed and dropped the photograph. Her eyes fixed on it, and for a second, her face softened into something like peace. "Thank you for bringing me home," she whispered. I fumbled with my keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the car started. The whole time, I could feel her eyes on the back of my neck. When I finally got the engine running, I slammed the car into reverse, not even looking where I was going, just needing to get away. As I backed up, I glanced in the rearview mirror. She was still there, looking at the photograph with that same peaceful expression. Then she looked up directly into my eyes through the mirror and smiled. "I can rest now," she said. I tore down that dirt road so fast my car was practically flying. Every few seconds, I'd glance in the rearview mirror, and she was still there, getting fainter and fainter with each look until, by the time I reached the main road, she was gone. Just gone. The photograph remained on the back seat though, proof that I hadn't imagined the whole thing. I drove straight to my apartment, blew through 3 red lights, and didn't stop shaking for hours. Jen found me huddled on the couch, still in my wet clothes, clutching that photograph. I tried to tell her what happened, but the words wouldn't come out right. She thought I was having some kind of breakdown. The next morning I looked up the address of that house. It took some digging, but I found an old news article about a woman named Elizabeth Mercer who died in a car accident on May 15, 1972. She was driving home from the hospital after recovering from pneumonia when her car went off Willow Creek Road during a rainstorm. According to the article, her body was found, but she'd been telling people she just wanted to go home in her final moments. I've driven different routes to campus ever since, even if it means adding 20 minutes to my commute. I gave the photograph to a local historical society, claiming I found it at a yard sale. I couldn't bear to have it in my apartment. But the thing is, it doesn't matter. Because sometimes when I'm driving alone at night, especially when it's raining, I'll glance in my rearview mirror and see her sitting in my back seat, just for a split second. And sometimes, right as I'm falling asleep, I hear her voice, that same whispery, distant voice. Thank you for bringing me home. I don't know what I encountered that night. A ghost? Some kind of echo of a tragedy? Whatever it was, it changed me. I used to think there were explanations for everything, that the world made sense if you just looked hard enough. Now I know better. Now I know there are things we can't explain, doors between worlds that sometimes crack open just enough for something to slip through. And sometimes, when it's raining and I'm alone in my car, I find myself watching the sides of the road a little more carefully. Part of me is afraid I'll see her again, standing there in her pale blue dress. But another part, a part I don't like to acknowledge, wonders if there are others like her, lost souls just trying to find their way home. I think about her often, this Elizabeth who died 50 years ago. I wonder if she's at peace now, if I somehow helped her find what she was looking for. I hope so, because the alternative, that she's still out there, still searching, still whispering to me from whatever place exists between life and death, that's too much for me to bear. So if you're ever driving through Willow Creek on a rainy night and you see someone standing by the roadside, maybe just keep driving. Not everyone who needs help is looking for the kind you can give. Some journeys aren't meant for the living to share. F.R.C. Story 13. I still dream about those eyes. It's been over 2 years since that night on Route 285, and I've probably driven another 100,000 miles since then, but nothing else I've seen on the road has ever come close to what happened that December night in New Mexico. I've been a long-haul trucker for almost 17 years now. Started when I was 24, fresh out of a divorce and needing to get the hell away from my hometown. The road's been good to me. Decent money, freedom, and the kind of solitude that helps you think without getting too lonely. I've driven through blizzards in Montana, flash floods in Arizona, and fog so thick in the Pacific Northwest you could barely see your hood ornament. But what happened that night, I still can't explain it. It was early December, and I was hauling electronics from Sacramento to Houston. Tight schedule, but nothing I hadn't done 100 times before. I'd been driving since 6 that morning, and night had fallen around 5:30. The temperature had dropped to the low 20s, and there was this light snow starting to drift down, unusual for New Mexico, especially that far south. I was somewhere between Roswell and Carlsbad on 285, one of those desolate stretches where you might not see another vehicle for 20 minutes at a time. My GPS said the next truck stop was about 40 miles ahead, and I was looking forward to some coffee and maybe something hot to eat. The radio had been fading in and out for the last hour, typical for those remote areas, so I'd switched it off and was just listening to the hum of my engine and the occasional ping of sleet hitting my windshield. That's probably why I noticed the truck so quickly. It was just there, suddenly, in the middle of the highway. No hazards on, no movement, just sitting dead in the center of my lane. I hit the brakes hard, feeling my trailer shift behind me as I slowed from 65 to a crawl in seconds. My heart was hammering in my chest as I came to a stop about 20 yards behind it. It was an old Peterbilt, maybe from the 80s, with a faded logo on the side that I could just make out in my headlights. Caldwell and Sons Freight. The paint was peeling, and there was something off about it, like it had been sitting abandoned for years, not hours. My first thought was that someone had broken down and needed help. My second thought was wondering why they hadn't put out flares or reflectors. Out here, with no lights and that dusting of snow, it was a death trap waiting to happen. I put on my hazards, grabbed my flashlight from the glove box, and pulled on my jacket. The moment I stepped out of my cab, I felt something was wrong. The air was dead still, no wind, which was strange for that area, and it was quiet. Not the normal quiet of a remote highway, but an absolute silence that made the hair on my arms stand up. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding strange and muffled in the snow. "You need help?" No answer. I approached cautiously, sweeping my flashlight across the cab of the old truck. The driver's side window was rolled halfway down, which made no sense in that freezing weather. As I got closer, I could see someone slumped over the wheel. "Hey buddy, you all right?" I called again, my breath clouding in front of me. When there was still no response, I walked up to the door and shined my light inside. What I saw, I still have trouble describing it. The driver was a man, or what was left of one. His skin was pulled tight across his face like shrink wrap on bone, gray and waxy. His eyes were sunken so deep they were just dark hollows, and his lips were pulled back from his teeth in what looked like a grimace or a snarl. He looked mummified, like someone who'd been dead for months, not hours. But then his chest moved, a shallow, rattling breath. I jerked back, nearly dropping my flashlight. This person, this thing, was still alive. "Jesus Christ," I whispered. "Sir, can you hear me?" I reached up hesitantly and touched his shoulder. The coat he was wearing felt ancient, the fabric stiff and cold. When I made contact, his head slowly turned toward me. Those sunken eyes opened, revealing milky, yellowish orbs with pinprick pupils. They focused on me with an awareness that sent ice through my veins. His mouth moved, lips cracking as they stretched. "Help me." The voice was like sandpaper on rust, barely audible. "I'll call an ambulance," I said, already backing away, fumbling for my phone. Just hold on." As I dialed 911, I glanced back at the road behind my truck and saw headlights in the distance, approaching fast, too fast for the conditions. I raised my arm, waving my flashlight to warn them to slow down. The 911 operator answered, but the connection was terrible, full of static. "911, what's your emergency?" "I'm on Highway 285, about 40 miles north of Carlsbad," I said, still watching those approaching headlights. "There's a man here who needs medical attention. He's in a truck stopped in the middle of the road and he's in really bad shape." "Sir, can you verify your exact location?" The operator's voice cut in and out. "I don't know exactly. My GPS says I'm about 40 miles north of..." The approaching vehicle was almost on us now, and it wasn't slowing down. I could see it was an old pickup, dark-colored, but the headlights were blinding me. "Hey!" I shouted, waving frantically. "Slow down!" At the last second, the pickup swerved, not around our trucks, but directly at me. I dove to the side, landing hard on the icy asphalt as it missed me by inches. My phone went flying from my hand, shattering somewhere in the darkness. I looked up, expecting to see the pickup continuing down the highway, or maybe crashing, but it was gone. Completely gone. There was nothing but empty road stretching into the darkness. Shaking, I got to my feet and looked around. No taillights disappearing into the distance. No sound of an engine. Nothing. Just the silent highway and the softly falling snow. I turned back to the Caldwell truck and my blood went cold. The driver was staring at me through the window. Not slumped anymore, but sitting upright, those horrible milky eyes fixed on me. His mouth was moving, saying something I couldn't hear. Every instinct in my body screamed danger. This wasn't right. None of this was right. I backed away slowly, then turned and ran for my truck. As I scrambled into the cab, I glanced in my side mirror and saw the driver of the Caldwell truck was now outside his vehicle, standing in my headlights. He wasn't moving, just standing there, staring at me. His legs looked wrong, too thin, like they could snap under his weight. I started my engine and threw my truck into reverse, backing up far enough to swerve around the Caldwell truck. As I passed it, I looked over and the driver was gone again. The truck was empty, driver's door hanging open. I floored it, pushing my rig as fast as I dared on the icy road. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the wheel. I kept checking my mirrors, convinced I'd see those headlights coming for me again, but there was nothing but darkness behind me. I drove non-stop to the next truck stop, a Flying J about 30 miles down the road. The whole time I kept trying to make sense of what I'd seen. Maybe the driver had some disease, maybe he was on drugs, but that didn't explain the pickup that vanished, or how the driver had moved so quickly from his cab to the road. At the truck stop, I called the police from a payphone and reported the abandoned truck. The dispatcher took my information but didn't seem particularly concerned. I tried to emphasize how strange the situation was, but I could tell she was just humoring me. When I mentioned the disappearing pickup, she asked if I'd been drinking. I slept in my cab that night, too shaken to get a room. I kept the engine running and the doors locked. I don't think I got more than 20 minutes of sleep at a stretch. The next morning, I called my dispatcher and told him I was sick and needed to reroute to El Paso before continuing to Houston. He wasn't happy, but agreed. I couldn't face the thought of driving past that spot again. In El Paso, I talked to some other truckers about the Caldwell & Sons company. An older driver remembered them, said they went out of business in the early 90s after the owner and his son died in a wreck on, you guessed it, Highway 285 in New Mexico. Their truck was hit head-on by a pickup that crossed the center line during a snowstorm. Both vehicles caught fire, and the bodies were burned beyond recognition. I've tried to rationalize what happened that night. Maybe I was overtired, maybe I hallucinated the whole thing, but I know what I saw. Those eyes, that skin stretched tight over bone, that voice that sounded like it was coming from something that shouldn't be able to speak. I still drive that route occasionally. My job demands it, but I never stop on that stretch of 285 anymore, no matter what. And when I pass through there, I keep my eyes straight ahead, never looking at the shoulder of the road where I sometimes think I can see a figure standing, watching the trucks pass by. The strangest part. About 6 months after it happened, I was in a truck stop in Arizona talking to another driver. Just making conversation, I asked if he'd ever heard of Caldwell & Sons. His face went white. Turns out he'd had an almost identical experience on 285 3 years earlier. Same truck, same driver, same vanishing pickup. Whatever I encountered that night, I don't think it was human. Not anymore. And sometimes when I'm driving alone at night and the radio starts to fade out, I can almost hear that rasping voice whispering, "Help me," like it's still out there, waiting for another trucker to stop. I never found out what it wanted, and I hope I never do. Story 14. I've been having a hard time putting this down on paper. Even now, my hands are shaking as I type this out. I guess I should start by introducing myself. I'm Maria Vasquez, and until 3 weeks ago, I was the newest officer at the Fairview Police Department. I had moved here from Chicago about 6 months ago, looking for that small-town atmosphere everyone talks about. Slower pace, friendly neighbors, less crime. You know the drill. Fairview seemed perfect. Quiet streets lined with maple trees, kids riding bikes without parents hovering nearby, and a police department where the biggest concerns were usually noise complaints or the occasional shoplifter at the convenience store. The kind of place where everyone knows your name. Within a week. A real change from Chicago's South Side where I started my career. I was working the Friday night shift alone. Sergeant Mills had come down with something, so I was covering the entire east side of town by myself. Not that it mattered much. Friday nights in Fairview were usually just teenagers hanging out in the park, or maybe a drunk driver heading home from the one bar in town. Around 11:30, I got a call about strange activity at the old Riggs warehouse on the edge of town. Dispatch said a passerby reported seeing lights and hearing noises inside. I remember thinking it was probably just kids looking for a place to drink or mess around. I should mention that I knew about the warehouse before that night. During my orientation, Chief Bryant had pointed it out when we were driving around town. He told me it was named after Officer James Riggs, who disappeared 15 years ago while investigating a break-in there. They never found him, and the warehouse had been abandoned ever since. The property was tied up in some legal battle between the town and Riggs' family, so it just sat there rotting. When I pulled up to the warehouse, I immediately felt something was off. My cruiser's headlights illuminated the massive building, all crumbling concrete and broken windows. It reminded me of those abandoned factories in Detroit, but somehow more sinister. The chain-link fence surrounding the property had a large hole cut into it, and the main gate was hanging open. I called in my position to dispatch and told them I was going to check it out. Looking back, I should have waited for backup, but in a town like Fairview, backup was usually 20 minutes away, and I figured it was just some kids I'd have to scare off. I grabbed my flashlight and approached the main entrance. The big metal door was slightly ajar, which seemed strange. Those doors were heavy, and if kids had forced it open, they would have left it wide open, not carefully cracked. The door creaked when I pushed it open, that horror movie cliché that's actually true in real life. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing a massive open space filled with old machinery covered in thick dust. Spider webs hung from the ceiling like curtains, and the air smelled musty and stale. "Police! Anyone here?" My voice echoed through the empty building, but no one responded. I moved deeper inside, sweeping my flashlight across the floor. What struck me was that, while most of the floor was covered in dust, there seemed to be a path where the dust had been disturbed. Fresh footprints, not multiple sets like you'd expect from teenagers, but a single pair. That's when my radio crackled to life, making me jump. The sound was mostly static, but I could make out a voice saying, "Officer down, need assistance." It was faint, distorted, but distinctly a man's voice. I immediately responded, "Dispatch, this is Officer Vasquez. Did you just call me? I'm getting a strange transmission about an officer down." Dispatch came back clear as day. "Negative, Officer Vasquez. No such call has been made. Do you need assistance?" I told them no, that I must have picked up interference, but my heart was pounding now. I followed the footprints deeper into the warehouse, past rusted machinery and collapsed shelving units. The trail led to a narrow hallway I hadn't noticed before. At the end of the hallway was a door with light spilling out from the cracks around it. Not flashlight light, actual electric light, in a building that had been abandoned for 15 years. I drew my weapon and approached slowly. "Police! Anyone in there? Come out with your hands up." No response. I tried the handle, unlocked. Taking a deep breath, I pushed it open, gun raised. It was a small office, a desk, a chair, filing cabinets along one wall. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dust except for one thing, an old police radio sitting on the desk. It looked like the same model our department had used years ago, according to the photos I'd seen in the station's hallway showing the history of Fairview PD. The radio was on, its power light glowing green. As I stepped closer, it crackled again, and this time the voice was clearer. "Officer down, Riggs, need assistance." My blood went cold. The voice had just identified itself as Riggs, the officer who disappeared 15 years ago. I tried to tell myself it was a prank, that someone had found an old radio and was messing with me. But how would they know I was there? And why would they be calling themselves Riggs? I keyed my own radio. "Dispatch, this is Vasquez. I'm at the Riggs warehouse and I've found an active police radio. I'm receiving transmissions from someone claiming to be Officer Riggs. Please advise." The response was just static. I tried again with the same result. My radio was working fine earlier, so something in this building must have been interfering with the signal. The old radio crackled once more. "Officer down, Riggs, trapped in basement. Need assistance." Basement? I hadn't seen any stairs leading down. I swept my flashlight around the office and noticed a filing cabinet that seemed slightly out of alignment with the wall. When I pushed it aside, there was a rusted metal door behind it. It had no handle, just a small indentation where one used to be. I hesitated. Every instinct told me to leave, to go back to my car and call for backup. But what if someone really was trapped down there? What if by some miracle Riggs had been alive all these years? I couldn't just walk away. I managed to pry the door open with my flashlight. Behind it was a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. The air that rushed up was cold and damp, with a smell I can only describe as old. Not just musty, but ancient somehow. I called down. "Hello? This is Officer Vasquez with the Fairview Police Department. Is anyone down there?" My voice echoed back to me, but there was no response. I started down the stairs, keeping my gun in one hand and my flashlight in the other. The stairs seemed to go on forever, much deeper than a normal basement would be. The walls were concrete, with dark stains that I didn't want to think too much about. When I finally reached the bottom, my flashlight beam barely penetrated the darkness. It was a large open space with concrete pillars supporting the ceiling. Water dripped somewhere in the distance, and the air was thick and hard to breathe. "Hello? Officer Riggs?" I called out, my voice sounding small in the vast darkness. That's when I saw it, a figure standing between two pillars about 20 feet away. It was wearing what looked like a tattered police uniform. I couldn't make out the face clearly, but what I could see was pale, too pale, with dark hollows where the eyes should be. "Help me," the figure whispered, reaching toward me. The voice was the same as on the radio, but now it had a hollow, echoing quality that made my skin crawl. I raised my gun with shaking hands. "Don't move! Identify yourself!" The figure took a step forward, and my flashlight beam seemed to pass right through it for a second. Then it solidified again, now closer. "Maria," it whispered, and hearing my name from that thing's mouth made me nearly vomit with fear. "You came. They never come. Stay back," I screamed, my finger tightening on the trigger. The figure dissolved into darkness, like smoke dispersing in wind. I spun around, trying to find where it had gone, but my flashlight only revealed empty space. I decided I'd had enough. I turned to run back up the stairs, but as I did, the door at the top slammed shut with a metallic clang that echoed throughout the basement. I raced up the stairs and pushed against the door, but it wouldn't budge. It was as if someone had welded it shut from the other side. "Help!" I shouted, pounding on the door. "Someone help me!" My radio was still just static. I tried my cell phone, but there was no signal this far underground. I was trapped. I turned to go back down the stairs, thinking maybe there was another way out, when my flashlight began to flicker. I smacked it against my palm, but the light only grew dimmer. "No. No, no," I muttered, shaking it desperately. The light died completely, plunging me into absolute darkness. Not the kind of darkness where your eyes eventually adjust. This was complete, impenetrable blackness. That's when I heard it. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming up the stairs toward me. I pressed myself against the door, gun pointed in the direction of the sound. "Stay back," I warned, though my voice was shaking so badly I barely recognized it as my own. The footsteps stopped right in front of me. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel a presence, cold air brushing against my face as if something was breathing on me. "Officer down," whispered Riggs's voice, right next to my ear. Trapped. Then I felt cold fingers touch my cheek, and I screamed. I fired my gun blindly into the darkness, the muzzle flash briefly illuminating a face inches from mine, a face that might once have been human, but was now something else entirely. Hollow eye sockets, gray skin stretched tight over bone, and a mouth frozen in a silent scream. I don't remember much after that. I think I passed out. When I came to, I was still in the stairwell, still in complete darkness. But something had changed. I wasn't alone anymore. I could hear breathing, lots of breathing, all around me. and whispers, dozens of overlapping whispers that I couldn't quite make out. I sat there for what felt like hours, paralyzed with fear, listening to those whispers gradually grow louder until I could finally understand what they were saying. Officer down, trapped, officer down, trapped. Over and over again, in perfect unison. Then my flashlight suddenly came back on by itself, illuminating the stairwell. There was no one there. The door at the top of the stairs was wide open. I ran up those stairs faster than I've ever moved in my life. I didn't stop running until I reached my cruiser, and I didn't look back as I sped away from that warehouse. I quit the force the next day. Chief Bryant tried to convince me to stay, said I was just spooked by an old building and an overactive imagination. Maybe he's right, maybe I imagined the whole thing. But 3 officers have gone missing from Fairview over the past 30 years. All last seen investigating that warehouse. And sometimes, late at night, I swear I can hear my police radio crackle with static, and that voice whispering, "Officer down, trapped," and now it's saying my name too. Story 15. I don't think I've ever written this down before. I'm still shaking just thinking about it, but I need to get this off my chest. Maybe someone here has experienced something similar or can make sense of what happened to me that night. I've been driving trucks for almost 20 years now. Started when I was 21, right after my uncle got me into the business. I've seen pretty much everything the road has to offer. Blizzards, tornadoes, you name it. But nothing, and I mean nothing, compares to what happened to me on Interstate 50 back in '94. It was September 17th. I remember the date perfectly because it was my daughter's birthday the day before and I'd missed it. Again. I promised myself I'd make it up to her when I got back from this run. Stupid thing to think about now, but that's what was on my mind as I drove through Nevada that night. I was making my regular Salt Lake City to Sacramento run in my blue Peterbilt. Nothing special about the cargo, just electronics headed for some big box stores in California. I'd done this route maybe 100 times before. I knew every bump, every curve, every lonely stretch of that godforsaken highway. I stopped at a rest area outside of Ely around 1 in the morning. Called my dispatcher, Frank, to check in. Everything normal. I remember grabbing a coffee from my thermos, taking a leak, and stretching my legs for about 15 minutes. The night was cold but clear. Stars everywhere above the desert. The kind of night that reminds you how small you are. Back on the road, I passed another trucker around 2:30. Dale Howell. I knew Dale from way back. We'd grab beers whenever our routes crossed in Sacramento. We flashed our lights at each other, and I remember thinking I'd catch up with him on the return trip, maybe grab breakfast. That was the last normal moment of my life. Around 3 in the morning, I was cruising along, radio playing some old Johnny Cash when I noticed headlights in my rear view. Nothing unusual about that, except they seemed really bright, way too bright for regular headlights. At first, I didn't think much of it. Probably just some jackass who forgot to turn his brights off, but then they started getting closer. Fast, like unreasonably fast. Within seconds, this vehicle was right on my tail, so close I couldn't even see the hood of whatever it was in my mirrors, just those blinding lights. I tried speeding up a bit, thinking they'd just pass me, but they matched my speed perfectly. This went on for about 15 minutes. 15 goddamn minutes of this thing, riding my ass on an empty highway in the middle of nowhere. My hands were getting sweaty on the wheel. I kept thinking, just pass me already, you son of a bitch. Then I started wondering if it was some kind of highway patrol with a busted light bar or something. So I slowed down a bit, expecting them to pull me over if that was the case. But they slowed down too, stayed right on me. By this point, my heart was really pounding. I'm not a nervous guy, but something felt wrong. Really wrong. The road was straight and empty. They could have passed me any time they wanted. Why were they just following? I grabbed my CB and tried to contact any other drivers in the area. Breaker 19, this is eastbound on I-50 near mile marker 223. Anyone got their ears on? Got a situation here. Nothing but static. I tried again, more urgently this time. Breaker, breaker. Any units on the highway? I've got an aggressive vehicle on my tail, can't see what it is, needs to be called in. Still nothing, and then the vehicle behind me did something that made my blood run cold. It swerved slightly to the left, just enough that I could see it wasn't just one set of headlights. It was 3 sets, arranged in a triangle. I'd never seen any vehicle with lights configured like that. "What the hell?" I remember saying out loud to my empty cab. That's when I switched to the emergency channel and started calling for help. My voice was shaking. I can admit that now. This is Martin Owens on I-50 westbound. I've been followed by an unknown vehicle for nearly 20 minutes now. Lights arranged in a triangle pattern. They won't pass or back off. Anyone copy? I heard nothing but static for about 30 seconds. Then a voice came through, distorted and barely audible. "Repeat your location." Before I could answer, the vehicle behind me suddenly accelerated and pulled alongside my truck. But it wasn't a vehicle, at least not like any I'd ever seen. All I could make out was a dark shape, larger than a car, but smaller than a truck. The lights were so bright I couldn't see any details. It was like looking into the sun. "They're trying to run me off the road," I shouted into the CB. "Oh God, they're coming alongside me now." That's when they started nudging my truck. Not hard, just tapping, like they were testing how easily I'd move. I fought the wheel, trying to keep the rig straight, but each tap got harder. We were doing about 70 miles per hour, and all it would take was one good hit to send me rolling. I remember thinking about my daughter, about how they'd tell her daddy wasn't coming home, about the birthday present still wrapped in my sleeper cab. Then came a hit so hard it nearly took my hands off the wheel. My truck swerved toward the shoulder, tires screaming on the asphalt. I cranked the wheel back, overcorrected, and felt the trailer start to fishtail behind me. "No, no, no!" I was shouting, fighting for control when I saw the turnoff. It wasn't a proper exit, just a maintenance road cutting away from the highway. In that split second, I made a decision that I still don't understand. Instead of staying on the highway, I yanked the wheel and took the turnoff at full speed. My truck bounced and rattled down this unpaved road, throwing dust everywhere. I was sure I'd bust an axle, but somehow the old Peterbilt held together. In my mirrors, I could see those triangle lights following me, but they were falling behind as I pushed my rig to its limits. The maintenance road went on for miles, twisting through the desert. I had no idea where I was going, just away from those lights, away from whatever the hell was behind me. After what felt like forever, the road opened up into a wide, flat area. I slowed down, my heart still pounding in my chest, and looked behind me. Nothing, no lights, no followers, just desert darkness. I sat there for a few minutes, engine idling, trying to catch my breath. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the wheel. When I felt steady enough, I reached for the CB again. "This is Martin Owens. I don't know where I am. Somewhere off I-50. Had to leave the highway due to an aggressive vehicle. Can anyone copy?" Static. Then faintly. "Location. Repeat." "I don't know my exact location," I said. "I took a maintenance road off I-50. I'm in some kind of clearing now. The vehicle that was following me had lights in a triangle pattern. They tried to run me off the road." As I was speaking, I noticed something strange. The static on the CB was getting louder, not in bursts like normal interference, but in a steady, increasing wave. And there was something else in it. A pattern. Almost like, oh Jesus. It was like whispering. Hundreds of whispers buried in the static. I dropped the CB like it was on fire. And that's when I noticed something else. The temperature in my cab was dropping. Fast. I could see my breath fogging in front of my face. "What the fuck is happening?" I said out loud, my voice sounding tiny in the suddenly freezing cab. That's when I saw them again. Those lights, not on the road behind me, but all around me, surrounding the clearing. Dozens of sets of triangular lights just hovering there in the darkness. I threw my truck into gear and floored it, not caring which direction I went as long as it was away from those lights. But they started moving too, keeping pace with me, staying in a perfect circle around my truck. Then my engine died, just stopped. No sputter, no warning. 1 second it was roaring, the next, silence. My headlights went out too. Even my battery-powered CB went dead. I sat there in total darkness, paralyzed with fear. The only light came from those triangular patterns slowly closing in around me. I'm not ashamed to say I prayed then, prayed harder than I've ever prayed in my life. The lights kept coming closer, closer, until they were right outside my truck. I could feel something pressing against the metal of my cab, not like hands or bodies, but like pressure, like the air itself was pushing in on all sides. My ears popped painfully. The windows of my cab started to vibrate, making this high-pitched whine that hurt my teeth. I covered my ears and squeezed my eyes shut. That's when I felt it, the truck moving, but not like it was being driven or towed. It was like it was being lifted. My stomach lurched like I was in an elevator going up too fast. I forced my eyes open and looked out the windshield. The ground was falling away below me. I screamed until my throat was raw. I clawed at the doors, the windows, but they wouldn't open. It was like they were sealed shut. The pressure in the cab kept increasing until I could barely breathe. Then there was a blinding flash of light, so bright it felt like my eyeballs were burning in their sockets. And then I woke up in the desert, alone, no truck, no trailer, nothing but the clothes on my back and my wallet in my pocket. The sun was just coming up. I had no idea where I was or how much time had passed. My mouth was bone dry. My head was pounding like the worst hangover of my life. I started walking, just picked a direction and walked. Hours later, a rancher found me collapsed on the edge of his property. He said I was raving about lights and whispers. Took me to the hospital in the next town over. The police questioned me for days, so did the FBI. They thought I'd stolen my own cargo, abandoned my truck. When they found my CB radio in a dry creek bed miles away, they were sure I was lying. Same when they found part of my truck at that old mining site years later. No one believed me. My own company fired me, said I was part of some cargo theft ring. My wife left me, took my daughter with her. I've spent years trying to make sense of what happened that night. I've talked to other truckers who've had similar experiences on that stretch of I-50. Not as extreme as mine, but the same kind of thing. Strange lights, aggressive following. Then, in 2012, this waitress contacted me, said she'd worked at a truck stop back in '94. Had a Polaroid she'd kept all those years, showed my blue Peterbilt inside what looked like a warehouse, but it wasn't sitting on the ground right, like it was suspended somehow. I don't know what happened to me that night. I don't know who or what was behind those lights. All I know is they took everything from me, my truck, my job, my family, my credibility. Sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night, freezing cold, ears popping, hearing those whispers in the static. And I know deep down they're still out there, on that lonely highway, waiting for another driver to come along. Story 16. I've been putting off writing this for months. Part of me doesn't even want to acknowledge what happened that weekend in April, but I need to get this off my chest. Maybe someone here has experienced something similar or can make sense of it, because I sure as hell can't. I've lived in the Appalachians for almost 15 years now, built my cabin myself about 8 years back. Nothing fancy, just a 2-bedroom place with a decent kitchen, wood stove, and a covered porch where I can sit and watch the wildlife. I'm pretty self-sufficient out there, which is how I like it. I've always been more comfortable with trees than people. My brother Mike and I have always been close despite being different types. He settled down in Cincinnati with his wife and 2 boys, Ethan, 5, and Connor, 7. They visit a couple times a year, usually for long weekends. Mike thinks it's good for the boys to experience nature instead of just screens. I agree. That weekend started normal enough. They arrived Friday around noon and the boys were bursting with energy after the 3-hour drive. Connor immediately wanted to go fishing while Ethan, the quieter one, just wanted to explore around the cabin. We spent that afternoon getting settled, grilling burgers and letting the boys run around the clearing around my place. I should mention my property is pretty isolated. The nearest neighbor is about 4 miles away, and the closest town is a 40-minute drive. Cell service is spotty at best. I've got a landline for emergencies, but otherwise, it's just me in the mountains. That evening, while Mike and I were sitting on the porch drinking beers, Ethan came running up all excited. His cheeks were flushed, and he had that look kids get when they've discovered something fascinating. "Uncle James, I made a friend. Can she come play tomorrow?" he asked, bouncing on his toes. I glanced at Mike, who shrugged. "What friend, buddy?" I asked. "Juliana. She lives in the mountains. She's really nice and knows all the best hiding spots." He pointed vaguely toward the tree line about 50 yards from my cabin. "Now I know every inch of these woods for miles. There are no houses nearby, no families, nothing but wilderness." Mike laughed it off as an imaginary friend, which made sense. Ethan had always been the type to create elaborate fantasy worlds. "Well, where does Juliana live?" I asked, playing along. Ethan's face got serious. "In the mountain. She says she needs your permission to play with me. She says it's your mountain." Something about the way he said it made the hair on my arms stand up. It wasn't his usual playful tone. He sounded almost rehearsed. "Buddy, you know there aren't any other kids around here," I said gently. "But it's fine if your imaginary friend wants to play." Ethan frowned. "She's not imaginary. She has long black hair and a white dress, and she's cold. She told me." Mike ruffled his hair. "Sounds like you've got a good imagination, kiddo. Time to wash up for dinner." As Ethan walked away, he turned back and said something that still makes my skin crawl. "She says she'll come visit tonight so you can meet her." I tried to shake off the uneasy feeling. Kids say weird shit all the time, but something about it stuck with me. The specificity, maybe, or the fact that we were miles from anywhere a little girl could realistically be. After dinner, we played board games. Then I read the boys a story before bed. They were staying in the second bedroom, which has bunk beds I bought specifically for their visits. Before turning in myself, I made sure to lock their bedroom door from the outside. Not because I was worried about Ethan's friend, but because the cabin backs up to deep woods, and I didn't want either of them wandering out in the middle of the night to use the bathroom and getting disoriented. Mike and I stayed up a bit longer, catching up. Around 11, we both turned in. Mike took the pull-out couch in the living room, and I went to my bedroom. I'm usually a heavy sleeper, especially after a few beers, but something woke me around 2 in the morning. At first, I thought it was an animal. Living in the mountains, you get used to nighttime sounds, owls, coyotes, the occasional bear rummaging around. But this was different. It was humming. A child's voice, soft but clear, humming a tune I didn't recognize. I sat up, heart pounding. My first thought was one of the boys had somehow gotten out of their room, but I remembered locking their door. I grabbed my flashlight and hunting knife, force of habit when investigating strange noises, and walked through the cabin. Mike was snoring on the couch. The boy's door was still locked from the outside, just as I'd left it. The humming continued, definitely coming from outside. I went to the front window and shined my light toward the trees. Nothing at first. Then, movement. About 30 yards into the tree line, I caught a glimpse of something white moving between the trunks. I adjusted my beam and froze. It was a little girl. She looked to be around Ethan's age, with long dark hair and a white nightgown or dress. She was playing by herself, picking up sticks and arranging them in some pattern on the ground, humming that eerie tune. My mind raced. What the hell was a child doing in the woods at 2 in the morning? Was she lost? In danger? I didn't stop to think about how impossible it was for her to be there. All I knew was a young child was alone in the forest in the middle of the night. I quickly put on my boots and jacket, grabbed a stronger flashlight and headed outside. I didn't wake Mike. Thought I'd check it out first. Maybe it was nothing. God, I wish I had woken him up. "Hello?" I called out, not too loud, not wanting to scare her. "Are you okay?" The humming stopped. The girl looked up at me, her face half hidden by her hair. Even from that distance, I could see she was pale, too pale. She didn't look scared or surprised to see me. She just stared. "I'm James," I said, walking slowly toward her. "Are you lost? Do you need help?" She didn't answer. Instead, she picked up her sticks and moved deeper into the forest. I followed, calling out reassurances, telling her I wasn't going to hurt her, that I just wanted to help. She kept a consistent distance between us, never running, but always just out of reach. The rational part of my brain was screaming that something was wrong, but I couldn't just leave a child alone in the woods. After following her for maybe 5 minutes, she disappeared behind a large rock formation. When I caught up, I saw she'd squeezed through a narrow opening between two boulders, a small cave entrance I'd never noticed before, despite all my years exploring these woods. The opening was too small for me to follow. I shined my light inside, but couldn't see more than a few feet in. "Hello?" I called. "Please come back out. It's not safe in there." No response, just silence. I stood there unsure what to do. I couldn't leave her, but I couldn't get to her either. After trying for several more minutes to coax her out, I decided I needed help. I marked the location in my mind and jogged back to the cabin to call the local sheriff. When I reached the edge of the clearing, I stopped cold. Something was wrong. The cabin door, the back door, not the one I'd exited from, was wide open, swinging slightly in the breeze. I ran the rest of the way, fear gripping my chest. As I got closer, I could see the door hadn't just been opened. It had been smashed in, the frame splintered like something had forced its way through. "Mike!" I shouted, bursting inside. "Boys!" The interior of my cabin looked like a war zone. Mud was everywhere, thick, dark mud smeared across the walls and floor. But it wasn't just mud. There were scratches, deep grooves in the wood paneling, like something with massive claws had been trying to dig through the walls themselves. I ran to the boys' room, my heart about to explode from my chest. The door, the solid oak door I'd locked earlier, was still closed but barely hanging on its hinges. Something had been trying to get in. The wood around the lock was splintered and gouged with the same deep scratches that covered the walls. I threw the door open to find Mike already inside, holding both boys tightly. They were all wide-eyed with terror, huddled in the corner of the room. "What the fuck happened?" Mike hissed, his voice shaking. "I don't know," I said. "Are you all okay?" He nodded. "We heard it trying to get in. For God's sake, James, what was that?" Before I could answer, I heard sirens approaching. The sheriff had responded faster than I expected, but I hadn't even made it to the phone yet. 2 deputies arrived first, followed by Sheriff Wilson himself. I've known Dave Wilson for years. He's a no-nonsense guy who's seen pretty much everything these mountains can throw at him, but even he looked disturbed as he surveyed the damage to my cabin. "You called this in?" he asked, confused. "No," I admitted. "I was about to. There's a little girl in the woods. She went into some kind of cave or crevice. I was coming back to call you when I found this." The sheriff frowned. "We got a call from this number about 20 minutes ago. Man said there was an intruder trying to break in." Mike and I looked at each other. Neither of us had called. While one deputy stayed with Mike and the boys, Sheriff Wilson and the other deputy followed me back to where I'd seen the girl. We found the rock formation easily enough, but in the harsh light of morning, it was nearly dawn by then, the opening I'd seen looked impossibly small, barely big enough for a cat, let alone a child. "You sure this is the place?" Wilson asked. Nodded, though doubt was creeping in. Had I imagined how big the opening was? Had I imagined the girl entirely? They searched the area thoroughly, but found nothing. No footprints, no disturbed ground, no sign anyone had been there at all. Just my own tracks leading to and from the cabin. Back at the cabin, things got even stranger. They'd called in an animal expert from the state wildlife department, a woman named Dr. Reyes, who specialized in predator attacks. She examined the claw marks and mud, taking samples and measurements. This wasn't a bear. she said finally. Or any animal I've ever encountered. Then what was it? I asked. She shook her head. The claw pattern doesn't match any known species in these mountains, and the force required to make these gouges in hardwood. She trailed off, looking troubled. Ethan wouldn't stop asking about Juliana, wanting to know if she was okay. When I tried to question him about her, all he would say was that she was his friend and she was sad because she was always cold. The sheriff organized a search party to look for the girl, but after 2 days of combing the forest, they found nothing. No missing children had been reported in the county or any surrounding areas. It was like she never existed. Mike took the boys home that Sunday. I don't blame him. I wouldn't stay there either if I had kids. I've had the door replaced and the walls repaired, but I still wake up in the middle of the night thinking I hear humming in the woods. The thing that haunts me most is the realization that came later, after everyone had gone, and I was alone with my thoughts. Whatever tried to break into the cabin went straight for the boys' room. It knew exactly where they were, and the only way that was possible was if someone, or something, had lured me away specifically so it could get to them. I don't know what Juliana is. I don't know what tried to get into my cabin that night, but I know it used a child's appearance to separate me from my nephews, and it nearly worked. I still live in my cabin. Maybe that's stupid, but it's my home. I've installed security cameras, motion sensors, and the strongest locks money can buy. But sometimes, when the wind blows just right, I swear I can hear humming coming from the trees, and Ethan still asks when he can play with Juliana again. Story 17. I've always preferred the night shift. There's something peaceful about watching over a sleeping town, making my rounds through empty streets while everyone else is tucked in bed. Crestwood is a small place, the kind where everyone knows your name, where the most excitement we usually get is breaking up teenage parties in the woods or catching someone running a stop sign. I liked it that way. That night started like any other. I clocked in at 10, checked my gear, and took the patrol car out for my usual route. It was a clear autumn night at first, stars visible above the trees that line our main street. The temperature had dropped enough that I could see my breath when I stepped out for coffee at the gas station around midnight. Everything changed around 2 in the morning. I was parked near the high school, finishing paperwork when the call came in. Dispatch said someone had reported lights and possible trespassers at Crestwood Cemetery. This wasn't entirely unusual. We get calls about teenagers messing around there every few months, especially around Halloween. But something felt different this time. The cemetery is one of the oldest in the state, dating back to the 1800s. Some of the town's founders are buried there. I remember responding to dispatch that I was on my way, then pulling out onto Main Street. That's when I noticed the fog. It seemed to appear out of nowhere, rolling in thick waves across the pavement. We get fog sometimes near the river, but this was different, denser somehow, and it moved in a way that didn't seem natural, like it had purpose. The cemetery is on the outskirts of town, down a winding road lined with old oak trees. As I drove, the fog got thicker to the point where I had to slow down to 15 miles per hour. My headlights barely cut through it, creating this eerie tunnel effect. The radio started to crackle with static, which wasn't unusual in certain parts of town with bad reception. I didn't think much of it at first. When I pulled up to the cemetery gates, I immediately noticed something wrong. The gates should have been locked. They always are after 6 in the evening, but they stood wide open, like someone was expecting visitors. I called it into dispatch, reporting the open gates and saying I was going to check for vandals. The response I got was mostly static, but I figured they got the message. I parked the car just outside the entrance, grabbed my flashlight, and stepped out. The silence hit me first. Usually you can hear distant traffic from the highway, or at least crickets and night birds. But there was nothing, just this heavy silence that seemed to press against my ears. The fog was so thick I could barely see the beam of my flashlight more than a few feet ahead. The cemetery has this wrought iron fence all around it, about 8 feet tall with these ornate spikes at the top. As I walked through the gates, I felt this pressure, like walking through an invisible curtain. The air felt suddenly colder, damp against my face and hands. I remember thinking I should have brought gloves. I've been in this cemetery dozens of times, for funerals, to check on reports of vandalism, even for the historical tour they do every summer. I know the layout pretty well. There's a main path that splits into 3 smaller ones, with the oldest graves toward the back near a line of pine trees. But in the fog, everything looked unfamiliar. The headstones loomed out of the mist like strange sentinels, their features distorted. I called out the standard, "Warning! Crestwood Police Department! If anyone is here, identify yourself!" My voice sounded muffled, like the fog was swallowing my words. That's when I heard it. Whispers. At first, I thought it was just the wind through the trees, but there wasn't any wind. The whispers seemed to come from all around me, just quiet enough that I couldn't make out what they were saying. I drew my gun. 15 years on the force, and I've only had to pull it a handful of times, but something about those whispers triggered every alarm bell in my head. I swept my flashlight across the graves, trying to spot whoever was out there. The beam caught on wet leaves, marble headstones, an old stone angel with its features worn almost smooth by time. As I moved deeper into the cemetery, the whispers grew louder. I still couldn't understand the words, but they had this urgent quality, like they were trying to tell me something important. My radio was completely useless by then, nothing but static coming through. I thought about heading back to the car to call for backup on the main radio, but something kept pushing me forward. That's when my flashlight flickered. Just for a second, but long enough to send my heart racing. In that brief moment of darkness, I caught sight of something, a figure standing about 30 yards ahead of me. When my light stabilized, I could see it clearly. Tall and unnaturally thin, standing perfectly still among the gravestones. It was hard to make out details through the fog, but I could tell it was facing me. "Police, show me your hands," I shouted, training my flashlight directly on the figure. But it didn't move. It didn't even seem to breathe. And then, I swear this happened, it just dissolved. Like someone had taken an eraser to it, wiping it away in fragments until there was nothing there. I'm not ashamed to admit I was scared. Every instinct told me to get out of there, but I kept thinking this had to be some kind of prank. Maybe someone with a projector, or a Halloween decoration left behind. I needed to find a logical explanation. So I moved toward where the figure had been, sweeping my flashlight back and forth, hoping to catch whoever was messing with me. That's when I tripped over something and nearly fell. I looked down and saw a gravestone I'd never noticed before, half covered in moss despite looking relatively new. I crouched down and wiped away some of the growth to read the inscription, and my blood turned to ice. Daniel Turner, 1978, 2023. My name, my birth year, and today's date as the death date. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping my flashlight. This wasn't possible. I'd been in this cemetery countless times, and I'd never seen this stone before. Someone must have placed it there as a sick joke, knowing I'd be the one responding to the call. But how would they know? And how could they have installed an actual headstone without anyone noticing? The whispers suddenly grew louder, almost deafening. They surrounded me, pressing in from all sides. I couldn't understand the words, but the tone was clear, urgent, insistent, warning. I spun around, trying to locate the source, and that's when I saw them, pale faces emerging from the fog. Dozens of them, with hollow eyes that seemed to stare right through me. They weren't solid. I could see the gravestones through their translucent forms, but they were definitely moving toward me, their mouths opening and closing with those terrible whispers. I fired a warning shot into the air, but the sound was deadened by the fog, like firing a gun underwater. The figures didn't even flinch. I fired again, this time directly at the nearest figure. The bullet passed right through it and pinged off a headstone behind. That's when panic really set in. I turned to run, but they were everywhere now, closing in from all sides. The ground beneath my feet felt strange, almost soft, like walking on a waterbed. With each step, I sank a little deeper. I tried to make it back to the gates, but I couldn't find the path. The fog was so thick I could barely see 2 feet in front of me. I just kept moving, pushing through the cold mist while those faces watched me with their empty eyes. The whispers had changed now. They sounded almost like laughter. Then the ground gave way beneath me. 1 minute I was running, and the next I was falling. I remember reaching out, trying to grab onto something, anything. My fingers scraped against dirt and roots. I lost my gun, I lost my flashlight, and I kept falling, much longer than should have been possible. I don't know how long I was in the darkness. It felt like hours. When I finally hit bottom, the impact knocked the wind out of me. I lay there gasping, unable to see anything. The whispers had stopped. There was only silence and complete darkness. Eventually, I managed to get to my feet. My phone was gone. Must have fallen out during the fall. I had no light, no weapon, nothing but the clothes on my back. I started feeling around, trying to get my bearings. The walls were dirt and stone. I seemed to be in some kind of tunnel or cave. The air was stale and smelled of damp earth. I started walking, using the wall as a guide. I don't know how long I walked in that darkness. Time seemed meaningless. My throat was dry, my stomach empty. I started hallucinating at some point, seeing flashes of light, hearing voices that couldn't be there. And then, after what felt like days, I saw actual light ahead. Faint at first, then growing stronger. I started running toward it, not caring what might be waiting. I burst through an opening and found myself back in the cemetery. But it was daytime now. The fog was gone, the sun was shining, and there was no sign that anything unusual had happened. No open grave where I'd fallen, no headstone with my name. I staggered to the gates, which were locked now. I had to climb over them. My patrol car was gone. I walked all the way back to the station, about 2 miles. When I got there, everyone looked at me like they'd seen a ghost. Turns out I'd been missing for 3 days. They found my patrol car outside the cemetery gates the morning after my shift, the engine still running, the radio hissing static. They're saying I had some kind of breakdown, that I wandered off into the woods and got lost, that I'm suffering from dehydration and exposure. They're making me see the department psychologist. My captain suggested I take some time off, said 15 years on the job can take a toll on anyone's mental health. But I know what I saw, what I experienced was real. I've gone back to the cemetery twice since then, in broad daylight with other people around. There's no grave with my name on it. The ground is solid everywhere I walk, but sometimes, when I close my eyes, I can still hear those whispers, and I know they're waiting for me to come back. Story 18, I still can't sleep through the night. It's been 3 months since it happened, but every little sound outside our cabin makes my heart race. I keep thinking about how long he was out there before we noticed him, just watching us, living our lives like everything was normal. I guess I should start from the beginning. My husband Daniel and I had always dreamed of living somewhere quiet, away from the noise and pressure of city life. We both work remotely. I'm a graphic designer and he's a software developer. So when we found this cabin for sale in the Appalachian Mountains of West Virginia last year, it seemed perfect. The price was surprisingly reasonable for a 3-acre property with a solid structure. The real estate agent mentioned the previous owner, a hunter named Frank Holloway, had gone missing during a solo hunting trip about 2 years prior. They never found him, but after the required waiting period, his family decided to sell the property. Maybe that should have been our first warning sign, but we were too excited about the opportunity. The cabin needed work, but it had good bones. A sturdy 2-bedroom structure with a large main room, small kitchen, and a separate outhouse about 30 feet from the main building. It was completely off-grid with solar panels, a well for water, and a propane tank for heating. Our nearest neighbor was over a mile away down the mountain, and the closest town was about 20 minutes by car. For 4 months after moving in, everything was perfect. We renovated the kitchen, replaced some windows, and fixed up the leaky roof. The isolation was exactly what we wanted. Peaceful mornings with coffee on the porch, watching deer wander through our yard, hearing nothing but birds and wind through the trees. I remember telling Daniel how safe I felt there, away from the chaos of the world. God, what a joke that turned out to be. It was a Tuesday night in October when it happened. The weather had turned cold, and we'd had an early dinner before settling in for the night. Around 9 o'clock, Daniel needed to use the bathroom and grabbed the flashlight to head out to the outhouse. I was curled up on our couch with a book, half dozing in front of the wood stove. When he came back inside about 5 minutes later, something seemed off. He locked the door behind him, something we rarely did, and I noticed his face looked pale. "Everything okay?" I asked. He hesitated before answering. "I'm not sure. When I was out there, I got this weird feeling like I was being watched. I heard something moving in the trees, but it was too deliberate to be an animal." I put my book down. "What do you mean?" "It's hard to explain. Like careful footsteps. When I shined the flashlight, I didn't see anything, but the sound stopped immediately. Then when I turned the light off and started walking back, I heard it again." We tried to laugh it off. Probably just a raccoon or maybe even a bear, we told ourselves. Daniel double-checked the locks on the doors and windows anyway, and we tried to get back to our evening. But something had shifted. The comfortable silence now felt heavy with tension. Around 10:30 we were getting ready for bed when we both froze at the sound of a branch snapping outside, close to the cabin. Daniel motioned for me to stay quiet as he slowly moved to the window near our front door. He carefully pulled back the curtain just an inch, then immediately dropped it and stepped back. "There's someone out there," he whispered, his voice tight with fear. I felt my stomach drop. "What? Who is it?" "I don't know, but he's just standing there, staring at the cabin." I crept over to the window and peered out. In the dim light from our solar lamps, I could make out a figure standing at the edge of our clearing, partially hidden by a pine tree. He wasn't moving, just watching our cabin. I couldn't see his face clearly, but something about his stillness made my skin crawl. Daniel grabbed his phone to call 911, but of course we had no cell service, another charming aspect of our remote location. We had a satellite phone for emergencies, but it was in the bedroom. Daniel quietly went to get it while I kept watch. The man had moved closer now, walking slowly but deliberately toward our cabin. I ducked away from the window and hurried to Daniel. "He's coming toward the house," I whispered, my voice shaking. Daniel was already on the satellite phone with emergency services, explaining our situation and location. The dispatcher said they'd send deputies, but it would take at least 25 minutes for them to reach us. We were on our own until then. We grabbed our hunting rifle from the gun safe, another thing we'd inherited from the previous owner, and Daniel loaded it while I checked that all the windows and doors were locked. We turned off most of the lights and positioned ourselves where we could see the front of the cabin but wouldn't be easily visible from outside. For about 10 minutes, nothing happened. The woods around us were completely silent. No owls, no crickets, nothing. Then came 3 slow, deliberate knocks on our front door. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. Daniel raised the rifle, aiming it at the door, and whispered for me to stay behind him. Neither of us made a sound, hoping the person would think we were asleep or not home. After what felt like forever, we heard footsteps moving away from the door and around the side of the cabin. Then came the worst moment of the entire night, one I still see when I close my eyes. There was a tapping on our bedroom window, and when we carefully moved to see, there he was. A man with his face pressed against the glass, hands cupped around his eyes to see inside. But what haunts me most was his expression. He was smiling. Not a threatening grimace or a crazy look, but a calm, almost pleasant smile, like he was greeting old friends. When he saw us looking back at him, his smile widened. He didn't try to break in or make any threatening moves. He just stared, watching our fear with that same serene smile. Then he raised one hand and waved like we were neighbors he'd spotted across the street. Daniel shouted through the window, "I've called the police. They're on their way right now." The man just nodded, still smiling, and then calmly walked away from the window, disappearing into the darkness of the trees. Not running, not hurrying, just walking away like he had all the time in the world. We barricaded ourselves in the bathroom, the only room with no windows, and waited for the police. I was shaking uncontrollably, and Daniel kept the rifle pointed at the bathroom door, both of us jumping at every creak and groan of the old cabin. When the police finally arrived, they found no sign of the intruder. They searched the surrounding woods with flashlights but said the area was too large and too dense to cover properly in the dark. They took our statement and promised to return at first light to do a more thorough search. One officer stayed with us for the rest of the night, but I didn't sleep a minute. I kept seeing that face at the window, that calm smile. The next morning, 3 deputies returned with a search dog. We expected them to find nothing. Surely the man was long gone. But around 11 a.m., one of them called us outside. They'd found something about 90 feet from our cabin, up the slope in a small clearing hidden by thick rhododendron bushes. It was a campsite, not just an overnight spot, but a place someone had been living for some time. There was a small tent carefully camouflaged with branches and leaves, a fire pit that had been used many times but always carefully covered to hide smoke, and a cooler containing food, some of which I recognized as having come from our own garbage. But the worst discovery was a tree stump positioned directly facing our cabin. On it were a pair of high-powered binoculars, a notebook filled with detailed observations of our daily routines, and several Polaroid photos of us through our windows, cooking dinner, watching movies, sleeping. Based on dates in the notebook, the deputies estimated he'd been watching us for at least 2 weeks. 2 weeks. For 14 days, someone had been documenting our every move while we lived our lives completely unaware. The thought made me physically ill. The police collected everything as evidence and told us they would increase patrols in the area. They also advised us to stay somewhere else for a few days while they continued searching for the man. We didn't need to be told twice. We packed essentials and drove straight to a hotel in the nearest town. We filed a report, and the police took the situation seriously. But without knowing who the man was, there wasn't much they could do beyond regular check-ins at our property. They found no fingerprints at the campsite. He'd been careful about that, and the only description we could give was of a white male, maybe in his 40s, average height and build, wearing dark clothes and a cap. After 2 weeks of staying in town, we reluctantly returned to the cabin. We couldn't afford to keep paying for the hotel, and we'd invested everything in this property. The police had found no further signs of the intruder, and they believed he'd likely moved on after being discovered. We installed security cameras, motion sensor lights, and a better lock system. Daniel built a fence around the immediate area of the cabin. We got a satellite internet connection so we'd always have a way to contact emergency services. We even adopted a large dog from the shelter, a German Shepherd mix named Rex, who barks at anything unusual. But none of it really helps. I still wake up in the middle of the night, certain I've heard footsteps outside. Sometimes I think I see movement in the trees when I'm alone during the day. The cabin we once loved now feels like a trap. Every window is a potential frame for that smiling face. Every sound in the woods might be him returning. The worst part is knowing how long he watched us before we noticed. All those intimate moments, all those times we felt safe and alone, we weren't. Someone was always there, observing, documenting, learning our habits. Someone who seemed to take pleasure simply in watching our fear when we finally saw him. We're trying to sell the cabin now, but who wants to buy a property with this kind of history? Until we find a buyer, we're stuck here, jumping at shadows and wondering if he's still out there somewhere, watching and waiting for another opportunity to tap on our window with that calm, friendly smile. Sometimes I wonder if he was connected to the previous owner who went missing. Was this his cabin before it was sold? Did he resent us for being here? Or was it just random, 2 people isolated enough to make easy targets for whatever sick game he was playing? I don't know which would be worse, but I do know one thing for certain. I'll never again believe that isolation equals safety. In the city, danger announces itself with broken glass and sirens. Out here in these ancient mountains, it watches silently from the trees, smiling as it learns your every habit, waiting for the perfect moment to let you know you were never truly alone.